Here, a downed, apparently Air France jet. A couple of agencies say it's a mid-sized jetliner with 200 people aboard, and it has crashed through the end of a runway and into a ravine. And part of the plane is still sticking up, but part is on fire. We're told now the plane is an A340 from Air France, and as you can see, traffic in the area is moving slowly on the eastbound side. On the westbound side, not at all. Obviously, police have it blocked off. You see the emergency vehicles in the background, billowing black smoke. John, anything new you can tell us? Have you been able to talk to any of the security people? Have they told you anything new?
No, right now I'm just driving on our drive back. I'm driving away from the site of the crash. I've been asked to leave by the police again here, so I'm going to get back closer to the GTAA terminal and see what I can see here. This smoke out here, it's pretty hard to see what's going on right now. I'm back quite a ways from the, I'm probably a half a kilometer back from the aircraft right now.
Yes, we may have a better bird's eye view of it from the traffic camera across the street, which we've popped up in our pictures here. Again, Air France, an A340. This may have happened about 10 minutes to 4 Eastern Time. There were some weather-related delays and some cancellations at Pearson all afternoon because of thunderstorms in the area. This may or may not have had an effect on the ability to land that plane, but something made that plane shoot through the end of the runway and into a ravine just before it reached the 401, which is a busy highway at the best of times, but certainly during rush hour it would have been clogged with traffic, and that plane appears to have come to rest no more than 50, 60 yards from the highway, which, as you can see now, is relatively clear of vehicles, with the exception of some emergency vehicles because it's been blocked off. Traffic still moving in the other direction, but smoke billowing and definitely a fire that is not under control. And the emergency vehicles seem to be well back. That may be by design because the jet fuel involved could be still very much a dangerous thing for emergency crews to get at it, but details are emerging slowly. The Peel Regional Police, which is the police services that takes care of the Pearson International Airport, say it's an Air France A340, and we have heard reports that as many as 200 people may have been on board. It is just about 20 minutes to 5 Eastern Time now, so this would have been just under an hour ago. And as we move our cameras around, you can see the flames licking up, and that is on the fuselage of the plane. Again, an Air France jet clearly landing in Toronto and having trouble with the weather perhaps, or some other mishap that has led it into a ravine. Our reporter and camera person John Finley was out there shooting some of the weather-related issues out there, the lightning strikes over the airport and so on, and he says he may have captured actually this plane going right through the runway and into the ravine when he's able to get his tape back. We'll obviously put that on the air just as quickly as we can. John, are you still there?
And once again, we want to tell you that the exact type of flight has not been confirmed, but the kind of jet that we are looking at here can typically carry anywhere from 250 to 350 people on board. Of course, one of the questions everyone is asking tonight is how many passengers are on board? What is the condition? How many people were on this flight as this occurred? All right, we have a little bit more information we can share with you now. Police confirmed this was an Air France flight that was trying to land when it ran into trouble. So we do know that. Not much more information coming at us this hour, but as we look at these pictures, we can see there is some movement actually taking place now. One of those emergency vehicles coming up closer towards the end that actually you can see they're now spraying it with some water and dousing the flames, trying to bring it under control. And as we watch, you can see what they're actually using there is a mixture of water as well as some flame retardant foam that's also being sprayed to try and contain this flame and this situation. And you can see it's having some effect there. The flames dying down a bit, but this by no means is going to decrease that quickly. This is a fire that's been burning for at least the last 5 to 7 minutes. So this is going to take some time to fight. You can see just from the amount of emergency personnel on the ground that this has to be a calculated maneuver on their behalf as well, because this is a huge amount of fire and smoke that we're talking about. So they have to be quite delicate in terms of their approach, as in any emergency situation. And this plane, I'm also being told right now, went off the runway 24 left. There are actually 2 parallel runways, 24 left and 24 right, and this happening on the runway 24 left. So that gives you some idea of where, in terms of the actual airport, this is occurring. And again, these are the types of runways that are used by the larger airliners that do come into Pearson. Again, we want to tell you that police have confirmed for us this is an Air France flight. Again, emergency officials trying to bring this under control, and the entire fuselage appears to be burning. So again, this is a delicate situation here, and you can see the smoke is only really growing in scope, so it's hampering some of their efforts as they try and contain this.
Caught fire shortly after skidding off the runway at Pearson International Airport. That's the big airport in Toronto. We're told, according to the Associated Press, this was an Air France passenger jet that was trying to land when it ran into trouble. There's no word on casualties. We have been told earlier more than 200 passengers, crew members aboard this aircraft. We're also told there will be a news conference. Canadian authorities scheduled a news conference at the top of the hour, 5 p.m. Eastern, a little bit more than 15 minutes from now. We'll, of course, try to bring you that news conference live on what exactly has happened. We're also standing by our CNN meteorologist Jackie Jarris is getting ready to tell us what the weather has been like in Toronto over these past couple hours. But clearly, the flames that we're seeing, the smoke that we're seeing, certainly does not bode well for what has just occurred, if in fact this is an Air France jetliner that has tried to make a landing and got itself in trouble skidding off the runway. Jackie Jarris, are you there? Can you tell us what the weather's been like in Toronto?
Well, they're looking at a thunderstorm right now, Wolf. There's been one that's been kind of hovering over the area for at least an hour. If you can see right here on my radar picture, that's the storm of concern, and the conditions are pretty ripe here for severe thunderstorms. I don't have the ability to go in and check in their radar site because it's not a U.S. radar to see the wind velocities in this. I'd like to take a better look at that, but we could be looking at a severe thunderstorm across the area. Downburst winds, possibly very gusty winds, and maybe even a little bit of hail in this thunderstorm. So as soon as I can get into that information, I'll know a little bit more, but certainly dangerous weather across the area.
Usually, Miles, and I want to have Jackie stand by and we'll get right back to her. Miles, in this kind of a weather situation, a big plane, assuming this is a wide-body aircraft, an Air France jetliner, according to the Associated Press, flying, we assume, from Paris to Toronto, and a lot of those transatlantic flights are scheduled to land in the late afternoon along the east coast of the United States and in Canada. Assuming the weather has been bad, would a big wide-body plane attempt a landing in kind of severe weather?
Well, I mean, certainly you want to avoid it, Wolf. I mean, in a perfect world, but there are all kinds of other factors that come into play in these situations as time goes on. As you say, you're at the end of a long leg, transoceanic leg. We don't know what the fuel situation was on this aircraft, for example. Obviously, there is some fuel left on board. You're seeing the fire that has resulted as a result of this crash. But there's any number of scenarios. How was the pilot notified about the weather in the area? What did the controllers tell him, for example? What sort of capability do they have at that particular airport for wind shear detection? Some airports are better than others. There are many airports in this country that have wind shear detectors strategically placed all over the airport. In other words, anemometers or wind gauges that give the controllers and ultimately the pilots, sort of a real-time view of where wind shear exists on the airport, because at the control tower, it might be one sort of wind direction and speed. It might be very different at the threshold of the runway a couple miles away. And so a lot of it is how much data did they have at the time, and then the decision making on the part of the crew as to whether to press on. These are all real-time decisions. When controllers tell you of a wind shear alert, it is ultimately the captain and the flight crew's decision, one way or another, whether to proceed. That's you know, kind of a popular misnomer is that controllers, because their term is controller, actually control the flights. The captain is in charge. The flight crew is in charge in these situations and makes the decision ultimately as to whether to press on and go for landing, Wolf.
All right, we're going to go to the scene now. Leah Walker, a local radio reporter in Toronto, is joining us on the phone. Leah, tell us what you know about what our viewers are seeing now, the smoke billowing from this aircraft, from this passenger jetliner.
Well, what I know is that this plane came off the runway. It slid off the runway and into this gully that you can probably see here. It's come off with obviously a great amount of force and into these trees and a creek here. As I was watching, I could see the flames take over this plane, and the last third or so of the plane fall. The rest of the plane go up into flames. It's essentially a fireball, and we're just watching as they attempt to put foam on it and try and get these flames out.
No word on casualties or the passengers, the crew members. You're not getting anything along those lines yet, are you?
No, we have no information on that. There are hundreds of emergency vehicles here to do whatever is possible to be done at this point. We haven't heard about any kind of experience like that.
We are being told by local authorities, the Associated Press is reporting, the Canadian press is now reporting, this is an Air France passenger jetliner. Have you confirmed that, Leah?
Well, it's certainly Air France. I can confirm that. As to the size of the make, no, I can't confirm those reports.
Presumably a flight coming in from Paris or someplace else in France. This is the time of day when those transatlantic flights are usually making their way to
That's
Toronto
right.
or other destinations here on the east coast of the United States. What's the weather been like? Our Jackie Jarris, our CNN meteorologist, tells us there's been some pretty bad thunderstorms in the area. You're there. What do you see?
Well, there have been some horrendous thunderstorms. Actually, there was an alert at the airport earlier today, warning because of delays, because there were thunder strikes right above the airport, thunder and lightning. So this has attempted to land in some very fierce weather that we've had today. I was traveling along the highway here that runs right beside the airport, and the cars were just crawling. You couldn't even see the airport at that stage because it was just gray with water and rain and pelting rain coming kind of on a sideways angle.
Because we're told that not only severe thunderstorms in the area, but heavy lightning as well. Our Miles O'Brien, who himself is a pilot, has been telling us this is certainly, as we all know, not necessarily propitious moments for which a plane to land. Miles, give us your thoughts as we see these pictures. We see rescue crews, firefighters on the scene, water now really coming into this aircraft. And we also know, based on all the times we've flown ourselves, the emergency procedures for getting off an aircraft in these kinds of situations, we assume those emergency procedures were intact.
Well, Wolf, there are two types of crashes. There are crashes where those possibilities exist, and then there are crashes like this one, where it is less likely, because what you're talking about is a plane that is low and slow, and there is, if in fact, let's just say for a moment here that it is wind shear and there was a sudden stall, it's not a scenario where you're performing a dead stick landing. You're more or less falling out of the sky. So my initial reaction and indication on this would not be highly optimistic for a lot of survivors in this particular case because of that scenario we just laid out. It's a different scenario than an engine out and the pilot able to glide in for some reason. This is a stall of the aircraft, you know. And let's bring in Wolf, if you don't mind. I'm going to bring in a friend of mine, a person who I've flown many hours with, John Wiley, retired.
Miles, hold on
captain.
1 sec. Before you do that, I just want to alert our viewers. The Reuters news agency is reporting this is an Air France A340, the Paris-Toronto flight. That would be an Airbus 340, as you had been speculating earlier.
Yes, and the person you're just about to talk with, John Wiley, has experience on the A330, I believe. I don't know if he's flown the 340, but very similar configurations, cockpits, and equipment. He flew these airplanes for U.S. Airways for many years. John, just give us an indication, if you would, on the kind of equipment that would typically be on board, and I know you flew for a different airline, but the kind of equipment that would be on board to guard against wind shear.
Miles, you're going to have what's called a predictive wind shear that's going to be looking at the scenarios or the weather in front of you. But one of the things is we're going to have to ask is about the airplanes that landed in front of them. Nobody's going to, especially in our society today, nobody's going to willingly or knowingly make an approach into a dangerous situation. So what we have to assume is that the information to the cockpit crew was somewhat ambiguous, to the point that they felt it was not necessary to break off the approach. There would have been other aircraft that would have landed in front of them, and then possibly when you get into the situation, and we've seen this before in accidents, the situation evolves so rapidly and is so dynamic that escape is impossible. We see the airplane sitting off the end of the runway, so we also have to ask questions about the runway being contaminated, possibly with water. One of the earlier interviewees that you talked to was talking about the heavy rain. That may not have been known to the crew, and I'm not sure that that is exactly germane to the approach. But once they got the airplane on the runway, the ability to stop the airplane, especially if it starts hydroplaning, you really have a problem bringing the airplane to a stop, and in this case we see that we have a runway overrun.
You know, and you bring up an important point, John, and that is the fact that in the case of these microbursts, it can be very difficult to predict them. You can say that the conditions are right, and yet plane after plane will go in advance of a situation like this, and everything will be okay. We
have seen that. We saw that at Dallas a number of years ago with the 1011 making an approach. The aircraft in front of them made an approach and landed without any problem. The 1011 comes along, and then it smashes into the ground. So we have to approach the situation again from the point of the view. We right now are looking at it from a God's eye view, and the investigators will be connecting the dots afterwards. And the amazing thing is that once all of the facts are in place, there's a researcher named Sidney Decker, and Decker has made a comment that afterwards it will be amazing how clear the information was afterwards and how it was so obscure while the process was unfolding. Because what's going to happen, of course, is everybody's going to point their fingers at the crew, and they're going to say what they did. And, of course, we know what they did. They made an approach in the weather that apparently was worse than they had anticipated. But we're going to have to answer the question of why that happened. What was the decision-making process, and what was their perception of the situation so that they continued the approach?
And all of these decisions feed on other decisions. I mean, literally, you could take this right back to decisions made in Paris, for example, how much fuel to take on.
Well, I'm sure that they had plenty of fuel. Your international flights are carrying tons of fuel as per requirement. So I would not think that fuel was a requirement, especially on the 340, which has very long legs. But our problem here, again, is going to be asking, what did the pilots see, and what was their perception of the situation? Obviously, we can answer their perception of the situation was that it was safe enough to continue the approach. This is an international crew. These are not rookies. These are not people who have crossed the Atlantic for maybe one or two times. So if we look at the history...
So, Miles, set the scene for us now. Based on what you know, the weather, thunderstorms, lightning, a plane runway, and going into this area off the runway. This is Highway 401, Canada's busiest highway around Toronto at Pearson International Airport. You were mentioning wind shear as a possible cause. It reminds me a little bit, and you guys know a lot more about this than I do, of what happened at Dallas Fort Worth Airport only, I guess it must be about a decade or so ago. There was severe wind shear that caused what might be a similar kind of crash.
Yes, I think.
Good news.
Okay, yeah, it's a fairly big plane, it looks like.
Vito, what can you see in terms, I know there's a lot of smoke there, but can you see in terms of how much of the plane is actually burned out?
Well, basically what I can see, because it's in the gully from here, there's a fence stopping me, is the tail end and just a bit of the tip of the left wing. and the rest of it is below eye level, and it looks pretty burnt up. Like there's tons of smoke. I don't think it's in good shape down there because the tail now has basically lost its whole color. The France logo or whatever it was on nice and clear when I got here, but now it's completely burnt gone.
Any change? I mean, you've been there for at least the last 40 minutes, you're saying. Any change in terms of what you've seen now compared to 40 minutes ago or 50 minutes ago?
No, it's pretty well the same. The flames go down, but then they get back up, and then they get them down. It looks like it's about to go out, and then it just fires up again. It must be the fuel. It's they're battling it good. There's a lot of trucks out there.
All right, thank you, Vito. We're going to go now live to Greg, who joins us on the phone now. He was an eyewitness to this fire, to this accident. Greg, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Greg, what can you tell me? What was your vantage point? What did you see?
Well, our office is located directly across from the airport, and it's very common occurrence for me to stare out the window as I'm on conference calls, and I was actually on the phone and saw a plane coming off of, it looked like one of the runways, and I was very curious at first because they're never ever that close to the highway. It literally looked massive because it was running right alongside all the vehicles on the 401, which is obviously the largest highway running across the north of the city. And all of a sudden it looked like it was going too slow to take off, and it didn't really, looked out of place, and then all of a sudden it started to teeter a bit. And then as looked like it was kind of a little bit of a wobbly state, it just burst into orange flames that probably went up, I'd say, hundreds of feet, and actually it just exploded. The plane just currently exploded exactly as I was speaking to you. I don't know if you could see a red ball, but I don't know if that's another fuel tank or something.
Now, wait a minute. Did you say that this explosion occurred as it was landing or taking off?
Immediately, just now.
As it was landing?
No, in this current time period.
Right now, you just saw that?
Yes. And the back of the tail right now is engulfed in flames as well. Going back to when I saw it, what happened, the actual ball of fire, when it exploded, when it landed, went up, I'd say, a couple hundred feet, and then within about 3 or 4 seconds, it was totally engulfed in black smoke.
Okay, tell us some more about what you can see right now, because our vantage point is obviously not as good as your vantage point. You said there was another explosion just now?
Yeah, the windows actually shook. It was much smaller than the original one, but it looked like it came from the front of the plane this time. And there's much more smoke coming from the plane currently, and easily the entire plane now is engulfed in flames, which was ever left.
Tell us, how far away are you from this actually right now?
The back of the tail just exploded, and there's debris flying up in the air. Not too much, just about 6 or 7 big pieces of debris flew up in the air. I'm approximately, I'd say, about a half a kilometer away directly from the site. Hello?
Okay, stand by with us, Greg. We just received some report, actually, or confirmation that there were 291 people on board, and we have no reports of any fatalities right now. We do want to tell you that the pilot and co-pilot of this aircraft did survive, and they are currently being debriefed on the situation.
Okay, I did not personally see this, but someone else in our office did state that they saw one of the ambulance buses pulling away from the plane as a lot of the emergency crews were still arriving. So I imagine that was some of the passengers that were lucky enough to get off. Obviously, I don't know who or how many, or I couldn't see any of that myself, but that was just secondhand information I had heard.
So tell us again, because we're being told now again that there were 291 people on board this plane, that the pilot and co-pilot did survive and are being currently debriefed on the scenario. What did you say a coworker or someone that you were with saw?
They saw they described one of the ambulance buses pulling away from the wreckage site, and obviously, I don't know where they were taking them, but obviously away from the site. So I would imagine that there were some people that were able to deplane.
And this was a large ambulance bus, or what kind of capacity we're talking about?
It was a larger bus. It'd be a typical transit bus, a public transit bus.
So presumably it could carry hundreds of people, or at least...
I couldn't quote that. I have no idea. Multiple people anyway.
So there is a possibility that whoever was on this plane, I mean, again, we want to reiterate, there are no reports of any fatalities here, but clearly that is a question that a lot of people are asking as you watch this airplane, which is fully engulfed in flames. Greg, who's been joining us on the phone, who is just about a half a kilometer away, says that there was now a secondary explosion. We do know the pilot and co-pilot are alive and are currently being debriefed. So again, no reports of fatalities now, but we do know 291 people were on board.
Mm-hmm. And as I said right now, it's been going on and off in terms of the dark smoke and then lighter smoke. Right now, currently after the last two current explosions, it's as I said, fully engulfed, and there's a large amount of black smoke coming out of the plane currently.
Okay, and Greg, you did mention that you saw an ambulance bus pulling up, and we are now receiving confirmation that many people have been taken to area hospitals. So it's clear that not only the pilot and co-pilot got off that plane, but several passengers did as well. We don't have a more precise number. I wish we did. We'll share it with you as that becomes available. Greg, if you just stand by, we're going to go to Vito Porto now, who's a freelance cameraman, who is also on the scene there for us. Vito, can you tell us, Greg was telling us just a moment ago there was a secondary explosion. Did you see that?
Oh, yeah, I felt it. I'm that close that it shook my truck here, and I seen the debris fly a few hundred feet in the air and come down. It was pretty scary, actually, there. And it's really inflamed right now, lots of black smoke, and let's hope those explosions didn't hurt any of the rescuers, because it was pretty big.
Vito, how far away are you, would you say, from this aircraft?
I got to be no more than 300 meters. It's just on the other side of the fence a little bit, not far from the road.
Okay, I do want to share with you and our viewers here that we are now getting word that there are many evacuations that are beginning to take place now from this surrounding area. So there is a fear that this might, another explosion might follow. There was the initial explosion which caused the fire, from what we are being told as well. There was a secondary explosion that, if you've been joining us live here, you probably witnessed just a short time ago. And obviously now officials are concerned there might be yet a third explosion, and evacuations in and around this area are going to be taking place, if not taking place as we speak. Vito, do you want to tell us what else you've been able to observe there?
Well, they're pretty scared about anyone smelling the smoke. It's getting pretty huge, and it's getting around. The wind's changing like every minute. And
Okay.
I think they're worried about people smelling it.
Vito, I want to thank you. We just want to recap and give you some of the latest here. We know that 291 people were on board this Air France Airbus A340 flight from Paris to Toronto, and this happening about an hour ago now. We've been bringing you live coverage. We will have the very latest, and our live coverage continues with Global National. We hope you can stay with us as we get more on this airliner on fire at Pearson International Airport. We do know the pilot and co-pilot are alive. They are currently being debriefed, and we also know that there was, from reports, that some people have been evacuated and are in area hospitals. Global National continues our live coverage now.
Now, breaking news from the Global National News Center.
Good afternoon. I'm Tara Nelson in the Global National News Center in Vancouver. We want to give you an update now on some breaking news this afternoon out of Toronto. An Air France passenger jet has skidded off the end of the runway at Pearson International Airport in Toronto. Peel Police telling us the aircraft is an Air France passenger jet. It was attempting to land when it ran into trouble. Now, we understand this is Flight 358, a regularly scheduled flight coming from Paris. It left there at about 1:30 local time this afternoon, and it was scheduled to arrive at about 4:15 Toronto time this afternoon, about just a little less than an hour ago, when something happened and it skidded off the runway into a ravine. This is an Airbus 340 that is the largest in the Airbus fleet. It seats about 252 people. We understand as many as 200 passengers may have been on board at the time. You can see the smoke billowing from the aircraft on the side of the 401 at the highway there at Pearson International Airport. We have our Ben O'Hara-Byrne on the phone with us, and he joins us now. Ben, where are you and what can you see?
Needless to say, with the fact that the plane itself arrived, the accident happened. The plane itself has ended up right beside the 401, one of Canada's busiest highway. It's created traffic chaos throughout the city. We're heading towards the scene now. We've had reporters closer to the scene for some time. Really what they're describing is the plane engulfed in flames for many minutes. Understand that this plane was attempting to land at the very height of what was a very brief but very violent thunderstorm here in Toronto, and there are certainly questions about the visibility. Certain witnesses telling radio stations here that they believe that the plane itself had landed far down the runway, at least further than they were used to seeing. Obviously, Transportation Safety Board officials will be on their way to the airport right now, hoping to investigate the reasons for this. But right now, we're simply trying to make our way towards the airport under very difficult circumstances. But following different media reports right now, we do understand that there's been 2 busloads full of passengers, apparently, that have been taken away from the area. But so far, no reports on whether or not there have been any injuries injuries or extensive injuries or anything along those lines. We're waiting for a press conference from the Toronto's Airport Authority coming up momentarily.
Ben, this is the, I mentioned this is the largest Airbus in the fleet, so it could have sat as many as 250 people. Are you hearing anything in terms of how full this flight was? Was it filled to capacity?
We're not sure. The word out there right now has been 200. That's the word that's been repeated. And the number of passengers, 200 passengers. As you've mentioned, it could hold more, and we're not. But there's been absolutely no confirmation of who was on board, how many people were on board, and whether or not, and how many injuries there have been. We have been monitoring fire station activity, and it has been fairly. Obviously, it's been fast, but no reports as to now in terms of if there are any casualties or not, and as to how many people were on the plane. We're still trying to determine that.
Ben, a witness told a local radio station that he saw smoke or steam coming from the back of the plane before it went off the runway. Is there any indication that there was a problem with the plane before it touched down, or that it touched down safely and then simply skidded into that ravine because of the weather conditions?
At this point in time, having listened to the same report, the same witness testimony, that witness seemed to say that was both commenting on the heaviness of the rain, on how bad the weather was at the time, but clearly believed that the plane itself had landed further up the runway than he was used to seeing. Now, whether or not there was a problem with the plane as it arrived, there have been conflicting reports on that. It would be, at this point in time, pure speculation to say if there had been a problem with the plane beforehand. But understand, again, the weather was bad, visibility was very bad, and we are hearing there may have been reports of even wind shear alerts at the time on the runway, or heavy winds on the runway. So there were a whole lot of factors at play that could have led to this sort of incident happening, even if there hadn't been a problem with the plane itself. But for right now, we're still waiting for confirmation, or at least some details from the airport authority and different officials, police and firefighters and so on at the scene, who may be able to let us know a little bit more about what exactly happened at that point. But again, the bad weather seems to have been, at least according to the witnesses we've heard, what they believe to be a mitigating factor. And there have been delays all afternoon at Pearson Airport. We've been listening in throughout the afternoon. There had been a red alert at Pearson because of this impending storm, and we know that it led to several flight delays and cancellations on the ground. So clearly they knew there was a problem with the weather. Just how much that weather played a role in this incident is unclear right now. And as you mentioned, with those different eyewitness reports, there may have or may not have been a problem with the plane going in.
All right, Ben O'Haraburn, thank you very much for that update. We just want to confirm for you again what we know at this point, that it is believed this is an Air France Flight 358, a regularly scheduled passenger flight coming in from Paris today. It's believed, according to witness reports, that it did actually touch down on the runway at Pearson International Airport. Whether there was something wrong with the plane when it touched down, or if it simply skidded off the runway because of poor weather conditions, but it did skid off a runway into a ravine. You can see the smoke and the flames still billowing from the plane right now. We, of course, will bring you the very latest. For any viewers who are near Pearson International Airport this afternoon, if there's any pictures that they would like to send, they can do so to yourpics@globalnational.com, and we will try and work that into our coverage this evening. But in the interim, Global Toronto has numerous crews working on this story, and we will return you to Jacqueline Milcherik in Toronto now to take this coverage for us this afternoon. Jacqueline.
Someone who flies a lot, that's pretty ominous, this notion that even in bad weather, pilots and crews and air traffic controllers, they sort of say, let's just get this over with and make a run for it. And I'm sort of paraphrasing what you're saying, Miles, but it's sort of ominous, because in my mind, if there's any doubt whatsoever about the safety of a landing, you avoid the landing, you stay up in the sky until you know there's no doubt whatsoever.
Well, yeah, and that would be if you had a doubt, and we're assuming for a moment that they had doubts before this occurred. We're also making a big assumption that the weather was a factor, although the weather was terrible by all accounts, and there had been warnings issued in that area, according to what we've been seeing. I'm wondering if John Wiley is still with us.
Before we get to John Wiley, though, if he is still with us, we do have an eyewitness on the phone, Miles. Corey Marks is joining us. Corey, tell us what you saw.
Well, it was roughly around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'll just give you a perspective of where the airport sits on the highway. A lot of us usually pull over to the side of the shoulder on the 401, and we watch the planes come in, especially this time of day. They come in and they land towards the west. so it's very easy to see big planes coming in, and some of us have our kids or whatever sitting there and taking pictures. It was about 4 o'clock, and it was getting really dark, and all of a sudden lightning was happening. There was a lot of rain coming down, and this plane was, I didn't see the size of the plane, but it was an Air France plane. Came in on the runway. Everything looked good, sounded good. He hit the runway nice, and then all of a sudden we heard his engines backing up. The airport itself, the runway, I don't know if you got a picture of it or not, but you can see the concrete, and then once the concrete ends, there's no barriers or anything there, and it just runs straight down onto grass and then into a valley. But he went straight into the valley and cracked in half. I mean, whatever you're seeing now, you're not seeing probably half the plane. You're probably seeing the back end of the plane because it's way down in there. Two of us that were standing here, we were about to run over and try to help sort of thing, but it went up in such flames, and I mean, there's still a couple of fireballs probably about 5 minutes ago still going up.
We showed our viewers that last fireball that just went up as well. Corey, how much time elapsed between the time that you saw the plane sort of stop and break in half and the flames really erupting? Was it only a matter of seconds?
Seconds, because we were about to make a move, thinking that years ago there was another crash almost in the same spot and went off the runway and didn't do anything. I mean, it was in seconds that the flames came up, and we just decided to stay back. And the weird part about it is usually, if, from my understanding, if there is problems in the air, the fire department there, we have a big fire department on the site of all the 3 terminals. They're usually on the runways waiting for it to come in, but there was nobody, so this was just something that happened whenever he hit and landed and just skidded off the runway.
Corey, had there been planes landing before this Air France attempted the landing, or was this plane sort of just one of the few that actually decided to come in?
No, there was quite a few planes landing before him, big planes. They usually route the big planes coming, flying from the east to the west, and they land on this runway from heading towards the west. But the time that he came in was just before the storm started, and I don't know if something, wind or lightning, I mean, it was black and it was lightning and raining and so forth. I'm sitting right on the highway right now still. We're pitched right in the middle lane there, right by the guardrail, and I can still feel the heat from the thing.
So you are, because we're showing our viewers this Highway 401. Right. This is the busiest highway in Canada that encircles this airport. So you're still there. You're watching this unfold.
Yeah, I'm still there. There's a whole bunch of cars here. There's a big white van there, and I'm a couple cars behind the white van. We've been here since, and a couple of people walking across the road now, coming towards us.
And and we can see those people crossing the road to where you are. You say you can feel the smoke, you can feel the heat where you are?
Yeah, you still can. Like I said, not too long ago, there was another fireball that went up, and it's in the valley. Like, there's a deep valley there, so when he goes off the cliff and went down, it probably took up half the. There's a fire truck now just blowing off a lot of water onto it now.
Yeah, we can see that.
See the flames. I mean, when he goes down into that valley, half the plane, if not 3/4. I don't know the actual size, if it was a 747 or an A320 or anything, but it was a fair-sized plane.
We are told it was an Airbus 340, which is a wide body. It's a big plane making this transatlantic flight from Paris to Toronto, scheduled to land at 4:12. It was coming in, you say, shortly after 4. Did it actually touch the runway, Corey?
Oh, yeah, it touched the runway. It hit the runway, and it seemed like everything was going good. The police want us to leave now. Everything was, I'm just driving away now. Right, everything was fine on the runway. I mean, he hit, everything seemed nice, and then all of a sudden we heard his engines go back, and then he just sailed on through and just kept on going.
Miles O'Brien, Corey,
no spinning, no tipping or anything.
Corey Marks, hold on for a second. Miles, if you're there, maybe you want to ask Corey, an eyewitness to what has happened, some questions that go through your mind.
Corey, first of all, you've shed an awful lot of light on this for us, because this changes our notion of how this occurred, whether he was in flight or not. And you don't happen to remember which way the wind was blowing at the time, do you?
No, sir.
You didn't notice a gust in any direction?
It was raining really bad, and it was lightning. I don't even remember which way it was going. I mean, the plane is still on fire. I don't understand why. I mean, they've been dousing it for a while.
Yeah. Do you have any sense, did you see any indication of survivors of any kind?
No, no.
Okay.
I didn't see anybody get out. But then again, there's a deep, like I say, there's a deep valley there. And if it went down and cracked in a certain spot, if they tailed off towards the north, I would have never seen them because the smoke was immediate with the flames. So if anybody got out, God bless them if they went that way.
I'm told that one of the runways there, which it heads to the west, runway 24, which would be 240 degrees on a magnetic compass, actually goes kind of downward, 15 feet down from top to bottom. Let me ask you this. Just tell me a little bit about what the weather you saw. Was it one of those storms where the sky becomes kind of almost greenish?
No, it was dark. It was really dark. It was you knew there was a thunderstorm coming. You smelt it, and then all of a sudden it just hit. It didn't last too long.
Now, did you have the sense that the plane touched down at the right place on the runway? Could you see that much? Do you know how much time it spent on the runway, in other words?
We were sitting there because we just got off of work, 4 o'clock. We just work around the area, and we usually do this, a bunch of us. And, I mean, it hit at the normal spot where we usually see them land. I mean, for that size of a plane, I didn't catch him coming exactly in, but when we turned over, we saw where he landed, and then from there was just watching him go straight across. I mean, full speed. But we heard it. We heard him back up the engines, and then he just kept going.
And could you tell anything about? Could you tell if he was braking? Was he skidding? Was there anything about it that you saw along the runway that would indicate that he was braking?
It was tough to, you can hear the motors because they're so loud. You got to remember, we were on a highway, so the traffic it's 4 o'clock. It's rush hour. It was a lot of noise going back and forth. I can't say that I did hear him skid or anything like that, or any rubber being put down, but we did hear the motors kick back in reverse motion, which is normal. We didn't think anything was wrong until the guy that I was with piped up and said, he's getting pretty close to the end, and then next thing we know, down into the valley he went.
And I think one of the things that investigators will look at here now, Wolf, this does change things a little bit. For one thing, going back to that microburst scenario, possibility of a strong tailwind there, the possibility that the brakes may not have served the pilot well for some reason, maybe a mechanical problem, or maybe a slick runway. Let me ask you this. Could you tell, was the runway slick? Were there puddles, anything like that? Was there driving rain at the time?
Like I said, it just started raining as he was coming down. So the runway probably was slick, and then there was the lightning, and then it was really weird because once he went into the gully, the rain was finished. It was done. I don't know if you can see on the TV or not. The roads are still a little slick because it hit, as of, like you say, a burst, then it was finished.
Corey, this is Wolf Blitzer in Washington. I'm going to have you stand by if you don't mind. Stay with us. I want you to listen to this next interview. Joining us on the phone from Toronto, Captain David Sheen of the Toronto Fire Services, who's joining us. Captain, what can you tell us about what has happened?
Well, we're very limited in our knowledge. What we can tell you is Toronto Fire has been asked to provide support and cover for Mississauga Fire and Brampton Fire, who would support the Greater Toronto Airport Authority Fire Department. We're currently setting up command operations and logistical operations closer to the airport, as well as ensuring a ready foam supply if they need to call on us for firefighting, and moving some of our trucks and manpower so that we can be of assistance in the area.
What we're seeing, I assume it's water, but maybe it's something else being sprayed aboard on the aircraft, the debris or what's left of this Air France Airbus 340. If you're looking at these pictures on CTV, what is being sprayed on this wreckage?
It's more than likely some form of firefighting foam.
And the purpose would just be to put the fire out. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's to provide a blanket and smother the fire.
How long did it take, do you know, to get some of these firefighters and equipment to the scene after this crash?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Greater Toronto Airport Authority has their own fire department, and they could best they could best respond with regards to what their response times were, but they're right on scene at the airport. My understanding is a code red was called at the airport, which put everybody on standby, so they would have been on the scene within seconds.
Do you know anything, Captain Sheen, about casualties?
Nothing whatsoever. We heard that a few casualties had been taken to some of the local hospitals, but we don't know which hospitals and we don't know how many.
Well, that's important information you're providing us, that there were survivors, as far as you know, at least some survivors who have been taken to local hospitals?
As far as I know, yes.
Do you have any idea how many?
No, none whatsoever.
And these were people aboard the aircraft, based on what you know, or people who happen to have perhaps been in the vicinity who may have got caught up in it?
As far as I know, I don't know whether they were from the plane or who they were. We just heard that a few casualties were taken to local hospitals.
Well, that's
a factor. Again, it's way too early to be talking about what may have caused this, but certainly the plane was attempting to land in the midst of what could be called very, very, very bad weather at the time.
Ben, we have heard that there were wind gusts, wind shears blowing of upwards of 100 kilometers an hour, and potentially it could have been vertical downdrafts that pushed this plane back to the ground. Are you getting any sense of that?
At this moment, not that much. What we have heard a lot more about is simply the rescue efforts. We know that there have been hundreds of police, hundreds of firefighters on the scene since nearly the very beginning. They've been calling in for more water from around different communities around the airport. Several hospitals have been put on alert. We understand there's a triage area set up for passengers that have been taken away by bus. We've been hearing reports that there have been 2 bus loads full of passengers. We did also finally get, it seems, from Air France, a final number on the number of passengers on board, 252. It could have been more. They hold up to 300 people, 252 people aboard. Right now, though, no word on injuries. As far as we're told, no word on if there have been any injuries, and if so, how severe those injuries have been. But we have heard some good news that there were busloads of passengers being taken away and crew being taken away from the scene. But for now, that's the only news we've heard concerning the safety of the people aboard that aircraft.
Ben, you mentioned earlier for us that the Transportation Safety Board obviously was on the scene this afternoon as well, attending the crash of this Air France Flight 358. We understand that the pilot and the co-pilot survived, so I guess the first order of business is speaking with them this afternoon.
Absolutely. I mean, we know for a fact that these passengers, and we'd have to understand that these passengers haven't officially arrived on Canadian soil, so to speak. They have to be processed. So I don't think we'll be seeing much of the passengers in the near future. As for the crew, if the pilot and co-pilot survive, certainly the Transportation Safety Board will want to speak to them as fast as possible. And there's also, of course, the issue of black boxes and so on. But we understand there's been 2 separate explosions in the plane area. The plane itself may well be heavily destroyed. They may have to actually go searching for those for any recording devices that may still be intact inside, but that may take longer. As you mentioned, for the TSB, it may be quicker simply to speak, obviously, to the people who are the witnesses, as well as the passengers on the plane, and certainly the crew may be able to offer some real insight as to what happened here, and that goes without saying.
Ben, we understand that there's going to be a press conference in about 30 minutes, so we're going to let you go so that our global crews can get to that press conference. We will just update you one more time as to what you are seeing here. There was a accident this afternoon at Toronto's Pearson Airport, an Air France passenger jet skidding off the end of runway 24 into a ravine. It is unclear as to whether the plane fell into difficulty before it landed or whether it actually landed, and because of severe weather and rain and vertical downdrafts of perhaps 100 kilometers an hour, whether that presented the danger, but that Airbus 340 slid into a ravine. Now that plane can carry as many as 350 passengers, though we understand it was not filled to capacity. 291 on board, many of whom have been taken to hospital now. Global Ontario is going to have full coverage right away if that's where you are watching us from. Otherwise, please join us for Global National this evening for the very latest.
This has been breaking news from the Global National Newsroom. We now return you to regular programming.
The ability of the pilot to brake and whether systems worked like the brake system and the spoilers and the reverse thrusters, all the things that slow down an airplane in these situations, whether all those things were working properly, and perhaps in this case the pilot didn't have the ability to slow down in time.
The plane has crashed at Toronto's Pearson Airport. This was the scene about an hour ago as the plane burst into flames at the end of a runway near Etobicoke Creek. And this is a live shot now of the scene. As you can see, the plane continues to burn and firefighters remain on the scene trying to extinguish the blaze. Good evening. Leslie Roberts is off tonight. Our team coverage of this developing story, the crash of an Air France Flight 358 continuing. The plane skidding off a runway as it was trying to land in stormy weather around 4 o'clock this afternoon. Now, right now, we are going to Global's Christina Stevens with the very latest details. Christina, what can you tell us?
Well, Jackie, we do know at this point that it was, in fact, an Air France plane that crashed off the end of the runway, an A340 Airbus. Now, we believe it's flight number 358, and that was flying from Paris to Toronto. It was due to land at about 4:10 this afternoon. It was shortly after that it appeared to have just slid off the runway and into a ravine-type area where it then burst into flames. Apparently, 291 people were aboard that. We understand at this point that they were evacuated from the plane. At this point, again, no confirmed fatalities. There are, however, dozens, perhaps all of the people injured, and they are on their way to local hospitals. Now, the plane you can see still smoking. Again, many of those people taken to area hospitals, and at this point, no confirmed fatalities. Jackie?
All right, thank you, Christina. That was Christina Stevens giving us an update on the situation at Pearson Airport. Now, here's a look at where the accident occurred. It went off the end of a runway in the west end of Pearson Airport, east of Dixie Road, in between Highway 401 and Explorer Drive. And Global's Carolyn McKenzie is live near the scene. Carolyn, what can you tell us? All right, Carolyn McKenzie will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, we're going to go to an aviation expert who also joins us, Dario Mantrandola. Dario, what can you share in terms of your expertise, in terms of what might have caused this scenario?
Well, the only thing I can speculate, considering that the severe thunderstorms that we had at the time, is that the only cause I can think of, and it was during landing, I believe, would be severe wind shear, something caused by the thunderstorm. A microburst, which could cause severe wind shear, which affects your indicated airspeed upon landing. So you can go from, on approach speed, that would be a normal speed, to, minus 50 or 60 knots within a matter of seconds, which would cause you to descend in a great hurry and be very difficult to maintain altitude.
All right, and Dario, what is the best that a pilot under this kind of severe weather condition can do to try and control, to try and land the plane?
Well, I mean, the way you're trained is that if there would be severe wind shear at that point, is that you would increase your power, as much as you can, and you would try to climb out of it. So you would pitch the nose up and try to climb. The problem is that if microbursts can have winds, downdrafts as much as 6,000 feet per minute, which is very difficult and pretty well impossible for a commercial airliner to climb out of.
Now, if in fact a downdraft did occur, we don't know that that was a scenario, but if it occurred, and we do know that some of the wind gusts were up to 100 kilometers an hour, we do also know that the pilot and co-pilot are alive, they survived, and they're currently being debriefed on this situation. The fact that they were able to escape, do you marvel at that, or would you expect as much from what you know?
Well, I did marvel at that, and I was very happy to hear that. I heard that a lot of passengers were getting out. I don't know exactly, if everyone survives or not, but it sounds like the pilots had some sort of control over the airplane. I mean, they overshot the runway, but they must have had some sort of control over it. Because they didn't nose in. I mean, it wasn't a total, catastrophe. So I'm sure they fought the airplane right to the end. So I think they did a good job that way. What exactly happened on the approach, I'm not sure.
Could this have been far worse in your professional estimation?
Well, it could have been a complete disaster. And usually in cases like that, they are. So if they were able to, get the airplane somewhat under control to be able to, and went off the runway. And if it wasn't for the ravine, maybe they would have done very minimal damage if they had just somewhere to run off to. without any kind of depression. They might have been a lot better off, but I mean, I think they must have done a fabulous job. If I hear people are getting off, then they must have done a fabulous job.
And we do know that an ambulance bus did approach the aircraft. We know that 291 people were on board. This type of an aircraft, which is an Airbus A340, can actually carry up to 350 people. So this plane was not up to full capacity, but pretty close, 291 people on board. Of course, not quite clear how many people were taken to hospital and what types of injuries were sustained by some of those passengers. Dario, I want to ask you, is that a typical response for an ambulance Airbus to sort of approach and to be able to cart people away based on the type of flames and the amount of smoke that we've seen from this explosion?
Well, the thing is, the fire and the explosion that might have, you know, I don't think the airplane crashed and then the whole airplane burst in flames. The fire must have started, and, you know, there must have been some time for people to get out. So the impact was so that, you know, there wasn't a total explosion. So even though the airplane is burning and burns up, you know, they must have been able to get some people out. So your response time, even as far as emergency goes, is a lot better if you can evacuate the airplane. So it wasn't that the airplane nose straight in and exploded.
Dario,
So the flames could have been after the fact.
Dario, I want to take you back to a lightning strike and how a lightning strike could affect a commercial airliner attempting to land.
That would probably be the last thing that I think would have caused that problem. I'm not saying it couldn't. It could, but it's the most unlikely part of it, I think. Lightning strikes usually will not, you know, do that much damage or blow up an airplane. I mean, they get hit by lightning quite often, I'm sure. And worst that happens is you get a little bit of damage, but I never really hear about an airplane crashing because of a lightning strike. So it must be related more to the type of weather that they got from the thunderstorm, as far as, you know, the water, the rain, the gusts, the winds, the wind shears. I think it would be more to do with that. But I'm speculating, of course.
Okay. Dario, I want to thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us. Dario Matrandola, an aviation expert. And right now we want to welcome our viewers from right across the nation. We want to welcome our viewers from right across the nation for joining us in our live coverage of an Air France Airbus A340. It is a daily flight from Paris. Arriving here in Toronto, there was an explosion on board the flight number is AF358. It was scheduled to arrive here in Toronto at 4:12. We want to welcome our viewers again from right across the nation tonight as we continue our live coverage from Pearson International Airport in Toronto. There has been a plane crash, specifically Air France Airbus A340. It is a daily flight arriving from Paris here in Toronto, flight number AF358. It was scheduled to arrive here in Toronto at 4:12, and that is when an explosion occurred on runway 24 here at Pearson International. We do know that 291 people were on board this plane. It is actually capable of carrying up to 350 passengers, and we can also tell you this hour that many of the passengers on board, or at least some, have been reportedly taken to area hospitals. We also can tell you the pilot and co-pilot of this plane are alive, and they are currently being debriefed on what happened. We also have some eyewitnesses that say an ambulance Airbus did approach and did manage to get some people away to area hospitals.
Grounded because of severe weather.
And lightning strikes and thunderstorms.
Sure.
Yep.
So, I mean, we just, at this point, nobody really knows,
No.
and it's going to take some time.
Now, how often can that happen, that a plane can be struck by lightning? And, you know, I mean, I know it happens frequently,
Yeah.
but that could cause damage. I thought the fact that there were rubber tires that would mean that you know, that would, because they must be struck by lightning frequently.
It does
when they're up in
happen,
the
yeah. So they're
atmosphere.
not. I don't think a direct strike is likely to have been the initial cause of this.
Could it have been the heavy impact of that landing?
Well, when she talked about, when Lee Romanov's friend talked about the dropping quickly, maybe we could just listen to that interview again, because if there was storm activity, as it appears there was at the time, there can be enormous downdrafts. And maybe we can just listen to that.
This
Okay,
is
let's
Lee
roll that.
Romanov speaking with us earlier today about a friend on the Air France flight from Paris to Toronto, an Airbus 340, A340. Lee Romanov, who joins us so often when it comes to insurance, is on the phone right now. And Lee, you know somebody who was on that plane. Thanks for speaking with us, Lee.
No problem.
All right, tell us, have you spoken to that person?
Okay, Joanne was on the plane, and she actually called her husband from the 401, and here's what he explained to me. She's on the plane, and she could see that they were coming down, and she said as they were landing, it looked like they were too high. Suddenly, the plane took a drop in altitude and then created a very harsh landing, bumping several times. She felt that the tires had exploded. Then they went sliding into the ravine. At that point, she said that she saw fire within the fuselage. They had popped the emergency chutes. She turned around and she could see a number of people fairly beat up, some with broken legs, that type of thing. And she said that just everyone was starting to slide out of the chutes to safety. She doesn't know if everybody got out, but she managed to get out and actually run to the 401 and call her husband.
Wow, that's incredible. And what's her condition, Lee?
She was just shaken up, but she was very concerned about the people when she saw that there were a number of people injured.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. Did she happen to mention the people that she said were pretty beaten up, the ones with the broken legs? Did she have a sense of whether they were able to get out of the aircraft as well? And where did she say the fire was in the fuselage? At the front or the back? Did she happen to mention?
Well, she was in the first class section,
so it would be in the back.
It would be, yeah, further in the back.
Wow. And did she happen to mention also the efficiency with which everything sort of happened? These are very trying and scary situations, but crews are very well trained also to deal with these emergency situations. What did she say? What does she remember?
Well, at this point, I'm trying to get in touch with her again. I think she must be one of the people that has been taken to the hospital. But she said that everything was very efficient, and then when people were starting to get off, she had felt that everybody had gotten off, but then when she reflected back to the people that were injured, she wasn't sure.
And does she feel she's lucky to be alive?
I think so.
Wow, it's
oh, yeah.
Now, is she
the captain wasn't able to apply sufficient braking power or whatever you call it, and then all of a sudden everything went up in the air. Well, passengers didn't go up in the air because they were in their seat. They were in their seat belts. But there was a real roller coaster going on, which I guess in the end turned out to be that he overshot the driveway. Overshot. I'm not saying that he did it, but anyway, we came to the end of the driveway and went into the ravine. Plane came to a abrupt stop, and that's putting it mildly. And there was smoke, and there was a bit of an announcement at first to just stay in your seats. I was in the very, very back of the plane and could see that there was fire outside. And I was the second person off the plane, down the chute.
Do you have a sense of whether many of the others who were with you were able to get off and safely?
You know, I thought so, but I haven't really had any concrete reports one way or the other. There's certainly, because really all I did was run like crazy. There was quite a bit of fire on the ground, and we seemed to be in a valley, which I guess turned out to be this ravine that there is between the landing way and the 401. So running like crazy at a time like that, you don't exactly look around and see what's happening.
Were you on the plane alone, or were you traveling with family or
No,
colleagues?
I was just with a friend. I'd just been a week in France through a wedding.
How did people react as they got off the plane? You say you were just
well,
running.
as I said, I was the second one off the plane. With the people around me, everybody was just running like crazy, just in case there was an explosion.
Do you know, was this before or after? Another eyewitness has told us that he saw an ambulance bus approach this aircraft. Was that before or after this ambulance bus? Do you know?
That was probably before. I was busy taking pictures at the point, so I can't give a complete accurate timeline on that one. But we were there about 5 to 10 minutes after the plane went down. I smelled the smoke, saw the fire, and knew it must have been that. But that was about 5 to 10 minutes after I saw that plane go over my head through the lightning strikes.
Now, Lee, I want to ask you, because we've just received a report that the airport's lightning detection ability was not functioning.
Oh.
How critical is that for a pilot?
Quite critical. I remember just flying my own, building up my commercial hours. You basically talk to controllers the whole time when you're in controlled airspace, and they're sort of watching their radar, and they're able to tell they see lightning flashes on their radar or a similar device. Now, what that tells them is it's unsafe to land for most aircraft, because, I mean, the previous gentleman I was listening to said that it is not the best thing to get hit by lightning, but it shouldn't, be detrimental to the flight. But in this case, who really knows? I mean, to speculate that, I'm not sure how many successful lightning strikes planes have had. And like I said, I couldn't believe that they were allowing them to land through that storm. There's a low-hanging cloud over it, and I saw maybe in a span of 5 minutes, I would say about 6 to 10 lightning strikes.
All right, Lee Thomas, an eyewitness to what happened here today. I guess anything to report as to what you're seeing right now?
I'm actually not there right now. I've taken pictures, and you guys have requested. Now I've got pictures from the moment that the plane crashed to about 20 minutes ago.
All right, Lee, I do want to thank you.
No problem.
And as we touched on earlier, we want to let you know that weather is believed to have been a factor in some of this. We had some possible downdrafts. We had severe wind. We're going to join Global Susan Hay now to tell us a little bit more about the types of conditions that we were experiencing in and around Toronto's Pearson International Airport at the time of this, what appears to be a crash. We understand that this airplane tried to land, but actually overshot the runway, and thus causing an explosion and a fire on board the aircraft. Susan?
Jackie, at the time of the crash, in the upper atmosphere, the wind speeds were actually all over the place, creating that up and down motion. And we thought that wind speeds could have localized at that time up to 100 kilometers per hour. So taking down with the downdraft wind, power lines, trees, and possibly it could bring down a plane. And what is a pilot to do? It's not any better in the upper atmosphere, and it was probably already in motion. This all started around 1:30 today. We had 2 separate cells go through the west end of Lake Ontario, and it's still quite active. And my concern at this hour, because of daytime heating, is all the heat and humidity plus the strong winds coming off the Great Lakes, all converging together. But right now, the warning is still for the west end, Mississauga, Brampton, right into Oakville. So there could be a reoccurring lightning strikes, heavy rain, damaging winds, of course, reports of hail, all up until the sun sets tonight. So who knows what's going to come our way. But again, this daytime heating, this severe weather was all happening at the time of the crash. Again, the cells sort of broke away and ended up around Toronto through to Mississauga. And this is where the severity remains tonight. But with these wind shears, anything could happen. It's localized. It's not to say that it's not going to go towards cottage country or to the extreme southwest. All the dynamics, Jackie, were there at the time of the crash, and wind speeds could have been in excess of 100 kilometers per hour, pushing the plane down. Back to you.
Okay, Global Susan Hay. Thank you, Susan. Now, we just want to recap and tell you what we do know at this point. We know that 291 people were on board this Air France Airbus A340. It is a daily flight that arrives in Toronto from Paris. The exact flight AF 358. It was scheduled to arrive here in Toronto at 4:12, and that explosion occurring shortly afterwards. From what we are being told from eyewitnesses, that explosion occurring as the plane overshot the runway as it was attempting to land. And this is the type of plane that we're talking about. It's an Airbus 340. It was delivered to Air France back in 1993. It's a wide-body airplane, and it was first launched in 1988. It holds as many as 295 passengers. Again, as we say, 291 people were believed to be on board, so almost to max capacity. We also want to tell you the pilot and co-pilot did survive, and many of those on board, or at least some of those on board, have been taken to local area hospitals. You can imagine friends and family members are awaiting to hear what their status is, whether there are any injuries. From what we understand, there are no fatalities at this point. We will continue to keep you updated on that portion of the story. Right now, we're going to join Global's Christina Stevens in our studio with an update on the situation at Pearson. Christina?
Well, Jackie, we have been talking a lot about the weather and its possible role in this crash. We can tell you there are reports that most things at the airport were in fact shut down at the time of the crash due to severe thunderstorms. In fact, the Greater Toronto Airport Authority saying that the lightning had been impacting some of its control features that it used during the storm, so that's why other things were grounded. The lightning detection system, in fact, had a problem. Other aircraft were grounded for the safety reasons as a result, and there's, of course, partly to protect crews who are on the ground. As you say, a pilot and co-pilot apparently have been taken out for a debriefing. We can tell you on that size of a plane, typically there would be about 12 to 15 crew members. Also, we have heard about many and many walking wounded, people who have been wandering around the area looking for help, even wandering over to Highway 401 as they look for family members and look for help. Reports of injuries such as broken legs, broken arms, but again, like you mentioned, Jackie, at this point, no confirmed fatalities. Of course, that's very good news. As for the rest of the airport operations, at this point, incoming flights are being diverted to Ottawa and Buffalo, and we'll have more information for you just as soon as we get it. Jackie?
All right, Global's Christina Stevens, thanks for that update. Now, here's a look at where this accident happened. The plane went off the end of a runway in the west end of Pearson International Airport here in Toronto, exactly east of Dixie Road and in between Highway 401 and Explorer Drive. And you can see by the circle that's been denoted there, that is exactly where this plane was attempting to land. Likely, from what we are being told, overshot the runway, and that's when the explosion and the fire occurred. All right, we're going to go back now to one of our eyewitnesses who was seeing this unfold. Lee Thomas, are you there, Lee?
Here.
Lee, what else can you tell us?
I guess from the moment that I arrived there, I saw the plane just become slowly engulfed in flames. At first, I guess the tail it was. What was the flight again? The French?
Air France AF 358 is the flight number.
Okay, yeah, I saw the tail of the plane. It just before the tail, maybe about 15 to 20 feet, I saw a fire that was just billowing out, and then as time progressed, the plane sort of buckled at that point, I guess, under the heat. And then it just progressed down the plane from the tail, down the plane towards the cockpit. And as it got down past the passenger windows, closer to the cockpit, we heard explosions billowing and flying debris up in the air, sparks everywhere.
And Lee, we're looking at videotape actually shot shortly after this occurred. You can see some of the emergency crews dousing the aircraft with a combination of flame retardant foam and water. They were doing this consistently to try and bring the flames down, and you can see the result is that heavy black billowing smoke. Lee, I want to ask you, because one of the eyewitnesses we talked to today during our live coverage was telling us that after the initial explosion, which happened about 12 minutes after 4 here in Toronto time, there was a secondary explosion around 5 o'clock our time. Did you see or witness anything of that nature?
Yes, it was an intense blow up. That was where the debris came up and the sparks. I tell you, I've never seen anything like it in my life. It sort of semi-shook me. You know, you expected it like somebody was shutting a trunk behind you. It was that loud in your ears, and it echoed through your body. It was quite intense. And like I said, debris was flying up in the air, maybe 100 to 150 feet above the plane. Quite a large section of something was flying through the air. I'm not exactly sure what it was.
And there was a report, well, we actually can tell you that fire crews and emergency officials were evacuating a large portion in and around the airport for fear of a third explosion. But I haven't seen anything of that nature. Have you, Lee?
No, I hadn't seen anything of that nature. Most of the fuel is stored in the wings, and the wings were not on fire. So I'm not sure if they're worried about that, if that was the factor that they were thinking the extra explosion was going to come from.
All right, our eyewitness and pilot in training, Lee Thomas, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Right now we're going to go and join Global's Anwar Knight. He joins us by telephone. Anwar, you're near Pearson Airport right now.
Yeah, actually, I'm on Britannia Road, Jackie, directly behind the accident. Let me start off by saying, once again, it is starting to rain a little harder now, and we have noted still some lightning, which I'm sure is still a concern for all the emergency crews that are on the scene. Let me sort of set the information that I've gathered here. When we talk about the accident, obviously there was some very active weather. The ground crew did notice the lightning strobes that were on the tarmac, and that's basically a signal device that warns all crew to get off the ground because of a threat of a lightning strike. And there has been some reports that this airplane might have been in a point of no return situation because it sort of was making its landing at the peak of the storm. At least that's what some of the people here are indicating. So that still, of course, will have to be investigated. What I also can tell you is that the airline will also have their own emergency team that will come and investigate what's happening. They're en route now, as well as the manufacturer of the airplane, obviously to determine exactly if it was a mechanical problem or was it weather or was it pilot error. So still chaotic here. Also, the emergency response here is incredible. They've been doing rehearsals for this type of scenario ongoing for years. And there are reports that some of the first emergency response teams were on the scene within less than a minute because they're obviously on site. They also have mobile triage centers. So everything was coordinated, from what I gather and what people are telling me, just perfectly. So they're prepared for something like this, but obviously nobody ever wants something like this to become a reality.
No, and Anwar, I also gather that emergency crews, perhaps the fast response was also due in terms of heightened security because of the recent terrorist attacks around the globe.
Without question. In fact, it's interesting what's going on here because we've been ushered away, 200-300 yards again on and off, and there's so many more police and tactical units that continue to drive into the actual crash site. And there are still spectators, but the police are starting to watch that. And one thing that they've also noted is the wind direction was changing, so they want us to get away from the what I would assume would be the very toxic plumes of smoke as it's sort of lost around the area here.
That's right. We were being told that they were evacuating or had evacuated a large swath of area surrounding the airport. Are you seeing how much of an area has been evacuated, or is it difficult to answer that?
It is difficult on where we're located. This is sort of I don't want to say a back road, but it's not a public use road. It's a road that takes you right into the airport. So unless you have identification, you can't go past a certain point. But at the outer limits of it, certainly lots, and I'm talking hundreds of people, of just spectators would park their car and walk in, and now police are trying to get everybody that shouldn't be here out of the region. So, yeah, the evacuation, at least where I'm standing, absolutely, it's ongoing, and there's a number of different officers that are coming in to certainly, build up the presence here. And let me just finally add, we believe the media response team is going to be coming here shortly and giving us a briefing in this particular location.
Okay, we're going to be standing by for that. In the meantime, Anwar, I just want to clarify, because you mentioned that you were being told that a lightning warning device on the tarmac was on at the time that the plane was landing. Now, another an aviation expert we talked to today said that the airport's lightning detection ability was not functioning.
Well, I was told by a couple of people that work in the GTAA that certainly the lightning strobes were on, and it's a pretty standard practice. These basically flare up, so all the ground crew, it's a visual thing basically saying we have lightning in the area, you have to take cover, and at that time they usually, stop any type of arrivals and departures that would require people like taking bags off planes. So that's what I was told, and apparently it lingers on even 20 or 30 minutes after the last lightning strike was noted. So I'll have to certainly investigate some more on that, but that's what I've been told by two people, in fact.
Okay, so I guess safe to say we're not exactly clear on whether or not the lightning detection systems were fully operational, but from what you're saying, they appear to be, at least.
That's right. And,
okay.
And let me just add, Jackie, in the Peel region of Mississauga, I mean, without question, they had some very severe weather. Driving here to the scene, there's localized flooding everywhere. There was a grape-sized hail that was falling down, huge signs. I'm talking, 15 by 25 feet on 4x4 posts that were knocked over. I really haven't seen something this significant in a very long time.
All right, Global's Anwar Knight, thanks for joining us and providing us with that update, Anwar.
You bet.
All right, and we just want to give you a bit of history here in terms of the worst accident at Pearson Airport. That was back on July 5th, 1970, when Air Canada Flight 621 was flying on a Montreal to Toronto to Los Angeles route. And in that case, the spoilers were inadvertently deployed before the plane landed. All 100 passengers and 9 crew on board were killed. In June of 1973, another DC-8 caught fire and burned to the ground while refueling at Terminal 2. There were no injuries or deaths in that accident. And as well, on June 26, 1978, another situation with Air Canada. That was a flight to Winnipeg that overshot the runway and had to abort takeoff. Now we want to recap and show you some of the footage that we've been gathering of this burning aircraft at Pearson International Airport in Toronto. This was a footage that we recorded earlier. You can see heavy, thick black smoke billowing from this burning plane. This is an Air France Airbus A340. It is a daily flight that arrives from Paris here in Toronto. The exact flight number, AF358. It was scheduled to arrive here in Toronto at 4:12, and that is when this explosion occurred as the plane allegedly overshot the runway, and we do believe that weather did play a factor, although we have no official confirmation of that. We're going to join Global's Nathan Downer now, who has some information on, from what I've been told, Nathan, family members who are gathering to get what little information is available at this point?
Absolutely, Jacqueline. I spoke with a few family members. What they're doing is they're putting them all in an area, a secured area inside the Sheraton Hotel, and they're giving family members some updates, but very little information. I spoke with a few family members, of course, a lot of concern, a lot of frustration. They don't know how their family members are doing, so they're still waiting to find out. All they've been told is that a few busloads have come in with passengers that were from the flight that are okay. They are in another secured area, so they haven't even met with their family members. They're waiting to get reports, as are we.
You say several busloads, because we had been speaking to eyewitnesses that told us they saw at least one ambulance bus that was taking some passengers away. So you're saying several buses now?
I'd say about 3. On our way into the Sheraton Hotel, we saw a police envoy of at least 3 buses with a police escort bringing them in, and reports are those were passengers from the plane, so at least 3 buses.
All right, Nathan, we're going to join you shortly. We just want to go to a live press conference taking place right now.
At this stage, and I can't confirm this, appreciate I can't confirm, but at this stage, the unconfirmed number is there were 297 passengers on board and 12 crew members. At this stage, and again I can't confirm, but there are no known fatalities. At this stage, and again I can't confirm, there have been minor injuries. There's some 14 passengers, but that again is unconfirmed. The Transportation Safety Board has been notified and obviously coming, and they will lead the investigation. We will not speculate on any of those matters. And that's as far as we have at the moment. The passengers have been, are being secured and will be appropriately processed, but that's an ongoing matter at this stage.
What were the number of injuries? You said minor injuries?
Minor injuries at this stage, and it's unconfirmed, is something around 14. 14. 1-4.
What were the radio reports of the pilot being taken to hospital for treatment?
I can't confirm any of those details at this stage.
What hospitals are they going to?
They'll be going to the hospitals that we normally relate, that we have an arrangement with, and again, I can get you the details of those hospitals.
Can you describe the conditions, the weather conditions at the time of the incident?
I don't want to get into any speculation about it. As you know, we have certainly been under what we call red alert since about 12:20 today, on and off, but there's no other comment that I would want to make at this stage.
Steve, can you describe the area where the aircraft came to rest?
Yes, I can.
You'll have to stay with the microphone if you can. We'll do our best to interpret.
It's the southern east-west parallel, and it came to rest about 200 meters to the west of that runway.
What's the condition of the aircraft at this point?
As you'll be able to see from the site, the aircraft has been extensively damaged by fire.
So Steve, could you just review for us again, in case someone couldn't get it the first time, just the circumstances? The plane touched down, it was come to make a landing, and then what happened?
All we can say is that it overshot the runway by some 200 meters.
What difficulties does it pose for you in responding into the ravine area from a rescue and standpoint?
The airport, as with all other airports, has undertaken extensive emergency service simulations, and we were able to respond very quickly. The first concern, of course, is to secure the passengers and secure the site, and that was done.
Is this not a gullied sort of area, a bit of a valley there at the end of the runway?
The Etobicoke Creek does run through this area, yes.
So it's somewhat difficult to get facilities down in there, is it not?
We were able to bring our emergency services to bear to the incident.
Had you had forewarning, the plane might have been in trouble
I'm sorry,
before?
one at a
Had you
time.
had forewarning, the aircraft might have been experiencing...
I have no knowledge of that, and I wouldn't speculate at this time.
Can you take us through the sequence of events when the plane arrived and when it got on fire?
As I said, at 16:03 Eastern Standard Time, it touched down, it overshot the runway, came to rest about 200 meters. The emergency services have responded immediately. Passengers were evacuated, and then fire broke out, and the plane has been extensively damaged by fire.
How quickly did emergency services get there to the scene?
I'm sorry?
How quickly did emergency services get there to the scene?
We have standards, and I would imagine they were met very quickly, and I can't tell you any more details.
What's the condition of the aircraft? Is it broken up in any way at all, Steve?
I can't comment. I just know that it's been heavily damaged by fire.
You mentioned the weather conditions.
I have no idea. Just appreciate that those questions about the cause of the fire and that are to be dealt with through the Transportation Safety Board.
Steve, in these sorts of weather conditions, what extra precautions are there on the ground for this sort of event? Not necessarily this bad, but do you have, when you have this bad weather, what changes appear?
Well, we always maintain the appropriate level of service for the emergency services. They're always on call and always appropriate.
You say the fire occurred after the evacuation. That was the way you put it.
As far as we know at this stage, the passengers were able to clear the aircraft before the fire broke out, but that again is an unconfirmed comment.
You mentioned the red alert.
What about other flights, please? What happened with the inbound and outbound aircraft and Pearson?
We have been experiencing red alert for most of the afternoon, and I believe that condition is still on, so there have been sort of holds on flights in any event.
Steve, you're talking about possibly just minor injuries here. Would you agree with me that this is miraculous, that we don't have a whole bunch of people, a bunch of fatalities here? How would you describe that in your words?
This airport is a very safe and secure airport, and we plan for these events. We hope they never happen. The fact that there was good response and that the passengers were able to be evacuated stands to indicate that our services met the test.
Steve, can you describe what a red alert system is?
Red alert is when our lightning detection system indicates there is lightning, and at that stage all ground side activity on the airport is stopped. While aircraft can land and take off, they can't be handled, there's no ground service for them.
So can you give me a sense then if a plane is approaching, is there a point where that plane is told it can land or it can't land?
I can't speculate on that. The airport is operated by NAV Canada, and I'm sure they followed all normal procedures.
And the aircraft still on fire?
At this stage, I believe the fire has now been contained and is under control.
So what are normal procedures when a plane is in approach and red alerts are on?
No, the question of a red alert is not that a plane can't land, it's that it can't be handled, it can't be marshaled, it can't be, there's no ground side service for it. This is a normal procedure at all major airports, at all airports.
Sorry, can you just be clear, what should passengers know who are coming to Pearson now for a flight?
Well, clearly there are delays because of the red alert, and also because while the airport is open, our emergency services are very focused on this, and that will be taken into account with the operation of the airport.
Can you explain again what a red alert in fact is?
A red alert is a situation that occurs at an airport when the lightning detection system is activated. It means there's a potential for lightning and thunder, and at that point there's no ground activity allowed, and so the aircraft have to stand without being able to be marshaled or unloaded.
So no flights were coming, no, sorry. So with regards to flight traffic, were they ongoing?
No, there would be delays. There would be delays. And there have been delays for a good part of the afternoon.
In and out?
In and out, yes.
Is there any indication where the other planes were directed to if they weren't landing here?
There's always, every flight has an alternate, and that would be directed accordingly.
Steve, you mentioned that it went over the runway by 200 meters. Does that mean it landed 200 meters further down, or just went overshot the runway?
I can't say any more than the fact that it overshot the runway by 200 meters. I think that's probably as much as I can say. We will keep you updated, and we're happy to come back in about an hour's time, and perhaps we can confirm some of the factors that I mentioned.
Steve,
thank you.
Just indicate once more on the map for us as to where it is that plane crashed.
Just here.
And where is that runway? What numbers are for it?
24 left.
And it's north-south runway?
East-west runway.
Steve, has anything like this ever happened before? When was the last time you've seen something like this here?
There was an earlier incident in the late 70s, I believe.
Similar to this?
Not unlike this, but I couldn't comment further on that.
You said minor injury. Could you just describe the nature of a minor injury?
A minor injury is obviously something that can be treated on site and doesn't require hospitalization necessarily, but there may be some of that. I can't comment any further. Thank you very much.
All right, and just to recap there, that press conference by Steve Shaw of the Greater Toronto Airport Authority, he telling us just moments ago, no casualties or no known casualties at this moment. 14 people, however, taken to area hospitals with minor injuries. In total, there were 297 people on board, 12 crew members, and there's a suggestion here that the evacuation took place before the explosion occurred, or before the fire occurred. We also know that the plane overshot the runway by some 200 meters. And obviously the aircraft heavily damaged, as you can see. As for the cause of the fire, airport authorities saying that the Transportation Safety Board is investigating, but they do tell us that so-called red alerts or holds on flights had been taking place all afternoon because of severe weather, which included lightning, thunderstorms, rain, heavy winds. We also have some aviation experts telling us that some of the airport's lightning detection systems perhaps were not fully functioning. Other people, some of our people in the field saying that some of the warning lights on the runways were functioning, so it's not been determined as of yet whether or not all the systems that should have been working were actually working. And right now we are going to go to Marilyn Marsh. She is on the phone with us, and she actually lives in an area near the crash site. Marilyn, what's been happening in your area? Marilyn, are you there? Marilyn, are you there? All right, we're going to join Marilyn in just a moment. Right now, we're going to join Global's Carolyn McKenzie. Carolyn, you're at the airport?
Jackie?
Yes, Carolyn, you're at the airport. What can you tell us there?
Yes, I am. The Greater Toronto Airport Authority just finished their press conference about a minute ago. Some things they did verify for us. And Jackie, stop me if I'm reiterating our points you already know and ask me questions you'd like to get answered. But we do know 297 passengers were on board. 14 were injured, suffered minor injuries. That is 1-4. At this time, no fatalities. Again, this isn't confirmed as of yet. This is what they believe at this time. As you mentioned, the plane overshot the runway by 200 meters and landed into the ditch. And once it was in the ditch, that is when it caught on fire. However, the passengers were all able to get out of the plane before the fire erupted. The plane had just come in from Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport. It arrived at 4:10. Many questions still unanswered. As you can imagine, the investigation is ongoing. The officials here are still very unclear as to what exactly happened. Jackie?
Okay, and Carolyn, I just want to share some information with our viewers now that we received. Police say that survivors and crew members actually staggered along the busy Highway 401 near the airport as they were evacuated, and the co-pilot was among the passengers who actually flagged down passing motorists following this crash. We also are having some reports of what at least one passenger was saying after this ordeal. He was saying it was a hell of a roller coaster ride, describing obviously the plane making that or overshooting the runway and then skidding down into a heavily wooded ravine at the base of Toronto's Pearson Airport. So just a little bit more information on what was happening on the passenger side that we didn't have earlier. Carolyn, I want to ask you, any more information that you could share with us in terms of these red alerts that Steve Shaw of the Greater Toronto Airport Authority was referring to? He said that they were taking place all afternoon, but he didn't get too specific on what those are, did he?
And actually, Jackie, I asked him to explain further what a red alert in fact was. And a red alert had been in place since 12:20 this afternoon. And a red alert is issued when there is severe thunder and lightning in the area. And that means when a red alert is issued, ground service is not in effect at the airport. So there were already major delays coming in and out of Pearson.
All right, Carolyn, we'll return to you with a few more questions. Right now, though, we want to join Kevin Duffy, my apologies, we're going to go to Lee Thomas, who joins us once again. And Lee, you were a pilot in training. You were also an eyewitness to this. What can you tell us right now?
Well, right now, I'm just, actually, I'm editing pictures here right now to send to you guys, and I'm just looking at this horrific scene. I just passed through a picture that I took with that fire just looking through, you look through the windows and you can see the fire just through the hull of the airplane. It's absolutely horrific looking at these pictures right here. As I look through them, I can see that the plane it almost looks like the fire came from the inside and it worked its way out and just broke the plane up. It's absolutely amazing.
Any more information that you could give to us from the pictures that you're seeing that might be more telling about how this all unfolded?
Nothing as of now, no. We're no longer at the scene, but when we left, that was just after the second explosion.
Now, I want to ask you, because just moments ago I shared some information we received from police about survivors and crew members apparently staggering along this busy Highway 401 near the airport, one of the busiest highways in the world. Did you see any of that?
Actually, yes, I did. I noticed that there was a pilot there. I could tell by the stripes on his wings and his white shirt and standard white pants. There was a lot of people. Where we stopped was about 50 feet from that. We saw two buses. Now, they loaded them up with people, two emergency buses. So I'm guessing that was some of the survivors that ran from the ravine area where the plane, the final resting place of the plane was, across the field to the highway, probably thinking that was the easiest way to get access to people.
And in terms of these buses, did you happen to notice whether or not the evacuation or these passengers were getting onto these buses before or after this explosion occurred?
Before the big explosion.
Okay, and that is also what we heard from Steve Shaw of the Greater Toronto Airport Authority just a moment ago. So really, these people immensely lucky that timing was on their side here.
Oh yes, very, very lucky. The second explosion, like I said earlier, debris that probably flew out about 150 feet, followed by billowing smoke and huge flames. So.
Do you have any estimation of, from the time that the people were evacuated to the time of the explosion following that, what was the time frame between?
About an hour, I believe. Like I said, we arrived about 10 minutes after the plane went down, and the flames were just starting. There was quite a bit of smoke. So I would think that there would have been enough time for people to get out. And I've heard that we have everybody survived, or if you can confirm that? Did everybody survive? Oh.
All right, and I also just want to ask you, because there was confirmation from Steve Shaw of the Greater Toronto Airport Authority that the plane did overshoot the runway by about 200 meters. Obviously, you're a pilot in training. You know that weather was a factor, that the airport was under these red alerts, which in essence, from what we've been told, means that flights are on hold all afternoon because of severe weather. Is that your understanding of them?
Yes. Like I said earlier,
should you be landing in a red alert? Could you land a plane in a red alert?
I haven't heard the actual term red alert, but smaller airplanes would probably have been diverted at that time due to the high volume of lightning strikes in the area and the reduced visibility. Now, they're saying that the runway that they landed on was not fully equipped for a low-level instrument approach. Now, I can't confirm that, but I heard that earlier. Now, what that means is the airplane would not be able to go down to as low as it could on other runways at the airport. It has higher minimums, so it has a higher decision height for the pilots to give it full power and go around again. So if they went past that point, then, and they still couldn't see the ground, it could have been 200 to 300, anywhere from 500 down feet.
Lee, it's safe to say your pilot in training and your professional estimation, it's somewhat of a miracle that this turned out as well as it did. From what we understand, no casualties, about 14 people taken to hospital with minor injuries. Would you share that view?
Oh, yes. I mean, the weather, like I said, when we were driving along and I saw that plane flying overhead, the only thought that went through my mind is, wow, I can't believe that the air traffic controllers are still letting them land in this weather. It was just absolutely horrific. I could hardly see 2 cars in front of me.
All right, and we are going to be learning more because the Transportation Safety Board, as we heard a short time ago, is investigating. Lee, I want to thank you. If you could just stand by with us, we're going to talk to you some more. But right now, as you know, no casualties, 14 people with minor injuries. You can imagine the kind of relief that some of the family members of passengers on board this plane are experiencing. We want to share some of our interviews with those family members now.
What's going on and how are people doing?
It's just very devastating and everybody is just waiting for something, and we just want to hear someone say that everyone's okay.
As far as I know, quite a few passengers have been taken to a hotel, quite a few others have been taken to some hospitals. What we've been told is no one's died, there's been no fatalities. That's what we've been told. What are they telling you inside?
That on the scene, there was a gentleman we were talking to, one of the firemen was on the scene. He said everybody's alive, which is our main concern. And
but we just want to see her.
You've got family? Who are you concerned about?
Our daughter Allison was on a French student exchange program.
What's your name?
Jeff Clement, and this is Madeline Clement. And she was coming back with another French student.
On an exchange.
Hey, good luck.
As you have been listening there, family members and friends of those on board Air France flight AF358 arriving here in Toronto from Paris, obviously very concerned, deeply worried about their family members or friends, and anxious to hear the latest as to their conditions. We do want to tell you again, no casualties, 14 people taken to hospital with minor injuries, and from what aviation experts are telling us, this situation could have been far, far worse. For the very latest on the situation tonight, let's join Global's Christina Stevens. Christina.
Well, Jackie, certainly it's almost being considered a miracle flight at this point, a crash with no fatalities whatsoever. We are starting to get word from some of the passengers who were actually aboard the plane when it went down. One saying they were just landing and suddenly everything went dark. The plane simply went black. There were no more lights. The man says the plane then went off the runway. It was suddenly in the ravine. They opened the emergency doors. Suddenly there were lots of flames. They just tried to escape through the gas and the smoke. Now, another passenger saying that he actually saw lightning just as the plane was trying to land in a torrential downpour. That passenger saying he's sure the weather must have had something to do with the crash. His final words, "We had one hell of a roller coaster ride going down the ravine." Now, as mentioned earlier, a lot of passengers did wander along the 401 looking for help. That included the co-pilot, who is doing fine, as well as the pilot. Now, a few facts for the type of plane we're talking about here. It was an A340 Airbus. It's a 4-engine plane developed specifically for long, non-stop flights with large numbers of passengers. Now, it was intended to be a smaller replacement for some early versions of the Boeing 747. Air France and Lufthansa were the first 2 flight providers to use the A340. Today, plenty of airlines, including Air Canada, do use them. And again, just some very good news at this point. No fatalities. Jackie?
Okay, Global's Christina Stevens with that update. Thank you. And we want to tell you that emergency services have transported 22 patients from the scene of the crash, all suffering non-life-threatening injuries. They were taken to area hospitals, including St. Joseph's Hospital, Credit Valley Hospital, Humber Finch Hospital, and Etobicoke General. As well, 1 infant was taken to Sick Kids Hospital. The rest were either treated at the scene or were not injured at all. So some very good news. Now, here is some video of fire crews responding to this blaze shortly after the crash, this courtesy CBC. As you can see, fire crews dousing the wreckage or portions of the plane with a combination of flame retardant foam and water, and having some measure of success with this. But I can tell you that in our live coverage today, it took emergency crews quite some time to actually douse the majority of this plane and to have these flames actually subside. You can see a very different scenario and situation now. Emergency crews still on scene, but that smoke nowhere near as dark and as billowing as it was about an hour or an hour and a half ago. Again, you can imagine the scope of something like this for fire officials to have to deal with. The airport officials, or the airport itself, has specific crews to deal with these kinds of scenarios, but there were several fire crews that responded. Just some more information on the specific flight. It was Air France Airbus A340. This type of aircraft was delivered to Air France in 1993. It is a wide-body airplane that was first launched back in 1988, and it holds up to a capacity of 295 passengers. And once again, just to recap and give you the very latest on this, about 22 patients from the scene of the crash have been taken to area hospitals, all suffering non-life-threatening injuries. From many of the aviation experts that we've been talking to throughout the course of this evening, many of them describe this as really a miracle. Some of them, as you might have heard, were saying they were shocked to even see an aircraft attempting to land in this kind of severe weather that was happening in and around the Toronto area. That being severe weather, including lightning, thunderstorms, rain, heavy winds, etc. We're going to get the very latest from Global's Carolyn McKenzie now, who is at the airport. Carolyn.
Jackie, as you can see over my right shoulder, you may not be able to see it right now. The sun is shining, but the smoke, which was once black, has now turned white, and the wind direction has also shifted in the last hour or so, and now the smoke is heading southeast, where before it was heading northeast. When we arrived, it was black smoke you could barely see in front of you, buildings you could barely see, and the smell was very pungent. It was an industrial type smell. It was the fuel of the plane burning. And actually, I spoke to someone here who was in New York for 9/11, and he said to me, he walked up to me and said, my goodness, this reminds me of what it was like in New York City, that smell. It's that jet fuel. Another point I just wanted to mention, just to give you an idea of how shaken people are at the airport. The gentleman, the VP of Corporate Affairs for the GTAA, Steve Shore, when he was asked by a reporter, is it miraculous that no one died in this? He paused. He was visibly shaken. His eyes welled up with tears. You can see that people here are surprised this has ended the way it has. And obviously, Jackie, some questions that we are still looking to get answered. What caused the plane to overrun the runway? And then what caused the fire to start after that? Jackie?
All right, Carolyn, we will rejoin you. Global's Carolyn McKenzie.
This is a shot of Pearson International Airport, where an Air France jet skidded off the runway, bursting into flames. Flight 358, traveling from Paris to Toronto, landing about 4 o'clock this evening Eastern Time. It touched down and then skidded off the end of the runway, crashing into a ravine. 297 passengers were on board, as well as 12 crew members. Airport officials say all of them scrambled from the plane before it burst into flames. Miraculously, as you can see there is still smoke billowing from that plane. Everybody survived this crash, and only 14 people were taken to hospital with minor injuries, many of them taken to local hospitals and already have been released.
Until you can start releasing your seatbelts, because we're trained to wait until the aircraft has completely come to a stop, and then to assess the conditions, and then start to get the people out. And actually, the FAA runs kind of imperfect conditions evacuation procedures, and you're supposed to be able to get everybody out in 90 seconds. And that's really, really fast. And that's banking on the fact that people are able to move. It sounds like there were not a lot of injuries or anything on the aircraft, so people were mobile and they could get out. And I think that's the wonderful, wonderful thing, is that everyone was able to get out like that.
We heard from the passenger who survived this air disaster, Olivier Dubose, Jenny, who said that the crew did not give them any advance word upon as the plane approached landing to get into an emergency sitting situation or to take some sort of action. There was no advance warning to them that there was going to be a serious problem. What does that say to you?
Well, that means we're trained in what is called an unanticipated emergency, and that's exactly what this is, because you're not expecting it. But as a flight attendant, as you're coming in for a landing, you're going to be thinking, well, if something should happen, this is the door I'm operating, these are the people I'm evacuating. So flight crew are always thinking on takeoff and landing what they should be doing if something should happen. And since it sounds like something happened as they were landing, literally on the runway, from some of the eyewitnesses that I've heard on CNN. But I think that, again, this is what we are trained for. This is what a flight attendant's job is to be able to evacuate, to assist in an emergency.
All right, Jenny, I'm going to have you stand by if you're kind enough to do so. Jenny Season-Henna is a former Delta flight attendant instructor who's been very helpful in giving us some perspective. But I want to bring in on the phone now Roel Bremer, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Roel, who himself was a passenger aboard this Air France Flight 358. You were sitting at the back of the plane, Roel. Tell us what happened as this plane landed on the ground.
Wolf, if I may call you by your first name,
Please.
I see you often on TV. The plane seemed to land okay, but I had the feeling that because of the weather conditions, the pilot had to bring down the plane in a fairly fast manner, and anyway, the plane overshot the driveway, and that was the first really scare. I mean, the plane went just up and down like a roller coaster. Then when we came to stop, sitting with a friend of mine, just came back from France, jumped up and headed for the emergency exit, and then the stewardess was there. You could only evacuate from the right of the plane because there seemed to be a lot of flames on the left-hand side. She opened the door, and I was the second one off the plane. I jumped. You don't think, you jump. And the second scare came when we saw the flames, then, of course, running through the fields as quickly as possible
They
to
usually
get away from the disaster scene.
They usually tell you, Roel, that when you jump down those chutes, you jump down one of those chutes and slid to the ground, that you're supposed to take off your shoes. Is that right? I don't know if...
I didn't have my shoes on, so she didn't have to tell me anything.
You didn't what?
I didn't have my shoes on.
Oh, so
sometimes you take your shoes off during a flight, so I didn't have my shoes on. And I think the most important thing is that you jump feet first, yeah.
You jump feet first, and was this an orderly, based on what you can tell? You were the second person off the plane. Was it fairly orderly, or was it chaotic?
Well, that's very difficult for me to say. It looked orderly, but when I got to the bottom of the chute and looked around and saw the flames, I only thought of one thing, is to just get out of there as fast as possible. And I just ran like crazy through the fields, over rocks and whatnot, to make the distance as big as possible between the plane and myself.
You were concerned, understandably, that there could be an explosion that would shortly follow it. How many minutes did it take for those fireballs? I don't know if you were looking back at the aircraft at the wreckage.
We saw already the fire through the window. When we came to full stop, we already saw fire on the left side of the plane.
You did see fire already?
Yeah, and there was some smoke in the plane. Not a lot, but it was a bit of smoke. So nobody had to urge me to run as fast as possible.
Did, as you were getting off the plane, what was going through your mind? Because we spoke earlier with Olivier Dubose, another passenger who survived this crash. All the passengers and crew member, we're told, thank God, managed to survive. What was going through your mind as you saw what was unfolding?
Well, twice. When we hit the ravine, in other words, when we overshot the runway, I thought that looked to me pretty much the end. And then the second time is seeing those flames around the plane. I was, my biggest concern was that the thing might explode, and that there wasn't enough distance between the plane and myself.
Well, did you actually think it was almost over for you?
I would say, I don't know how much you think at a time like that, because you're running. But on those two occasions, I can't say that I was particularly happy.
No, I don't blame you. Obviously, you're not happy at all. Who can be prepared for this kind of a situation? But you're obviously very happy right now.
Well, I'm very happy. My son came to pick me up at the airport, and for a few minutes, he knew about the crash, but didn't know that I'd survived. So those were a couple of difficult minutes till I got hold of him on my cell phone. And and from what I gather, there's no fatalities. So it ended okay in a way. I can't wait to go home and have a hot bath.
It ended excellent. Ro, what were you doing? You were just visiting Paris?
Yeah, actually, Olivier Dubois and I are neighbors, and his sister was getting married near Lyon in the south of France, and so we just went over for a week for a wedding.
So the crew really did an excellent job saving the lives of the passengers. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I can't actually say that, because being at the back of the plane and being the first one off, it's difficult to say. But it didn't look to me that they lost their cool.
They were there, and did the crew stay on board? Well, you don't know this until the.
As I said, I was Olivia and I were actually the two first ones off the plane, and we just ran like hell. And you don't spend a lot of time looking back. But I mean, there were other people coming, continuing off the plane. There was people were running with us and so on. But I certainly don't know what was going on.
And you did seem to think, correct me if I'm wrong, that lightning may have struck this aircraft.
Well, the reason why is that the lights went off as we landed. So that seemed to me a bit of an indication that there was possibly something wrong. Because normally the lights don't go off when you land.
But you didn't hear or feel lightning really touch the plane?
No. But I just had that feeling that I think the captain was on purpose bringing that plane fast. Now, whether it was to escape the weather or whether there was maybe a little damage to the plane, I can't tell. Because
it was your sense that he was descending more rapidly than a normal flight? Is that what you're saying?
Possibly descending more rapidly, but certainly approaching the runway, I would think, with more than normal speed.
And then all of a sudden,
maybe as a result, trying to bring in the plane fast, which he probably had to. As a result, he didn't have enough distance to apply the brakes, and we ended up in the ravine. I mean, but that's just my personal sort of.
It was just your impression. Olivier didn't seem to think that the turbulence before the landing was more extraordinary than had occurred on many of his flights.
No, not really, although there was a lot of lightning around us.
You could see the lightning, but
lightning
was the plane like going up and down? Were you being kicked around inside that cabin?
Oh, when it hit the ravine, we
not when it kicked when you got the ravine, but before, as you were approaching the runway.
No, everything was fine. We approached the runway. Even the landing itself was fine. It was just all hell broke loose when it. I mean, as far as moving around and not that I see anybody flying through the air, but it was a very, very rocky landing in the ravine, that is.
And now I think you, especially, and your fellow passengers, fully understand why these flight attendants and these crews on all these aircraft, they always say, strap yourselves in low and tight with the seatbelt. Make sure there's nothing in the aisles. There's nothing in the overhead.
And don't take your seatbelt off until you come to a full stop. I mean, it sounds a bit, you know, I'm being overdoing it a bit maybe, but we thought we'd had a good landing. I mean, some people were clapping and whatnot, and then it happened. So yeah, you're right. Those safety measures are not for the fun of it.
And it makes sense to listen to those flight attendants as they explain the emergency procedures and not sort of simply read your newspaper or read a magazine or doze off, because these are life-saving maneuvers.
I had no problem listening, because one of the French attendants was particularly cute, so I had no problem watching and listening.
All right, well, that's encouraging. Roel Bremer, it was kind of you to spend some time with us, and congratulations to you and all the passengers aboard this aircraft for surviving what clearly is a horrendous situation, but we're grateful that you can join us. I'm sure your family is grateful as well. Thanks very much, and go back and relax a little bit now if you can. Roel Bremer, a passenger aboard Air France Flight 358, surviving this crash together with 296 other passengers and 12 crew members. We're going to continue our special coverage, but we'll take a quick break.
This is CNN Breaking News. This is CNN Breaking News.
Approaching almost 3 hours ago, Air France Flight 358 from Charles de Gaulle International Airport outside Paris, scheduled to land 4:12 at Pearson International Airport outside Toronto. Actually at 4:03 Eastern, the plane did touch down on a runway but overshot the runway about 200 yards, and the plane then crashed into a ravine, a wooded area not far from Highway 401, which runs on the outskirts of Pearson International Airport. The good news, all 297 passengers, the 12 crew members, all survived. 309 people on board this Airbus 340. Minor injuries as described for 14 passengers, all this according to the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. We heard earlier during that brief window when the people could escape, 309 people could escape. There was a brief period before the flames engulfed the cabin, the smoke engulfed the cabin. The doors were open, the chutes were open, and everyone got off that plane alive. Here's an eyewitness, a passenger who was aboard the aircraft, Olivier Dubois, who spoke with us just a short time ago.
I don't know if it is possible that a plane got hit by a lightning and then you can't feel it, but what is for sure is that a minute before touching ground, there was no more light in the plane. The light was totally cut off.
The light was totally cut off before the plane touched the ground. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, all the lighting was off in the plane just a minute before we touched ground.
What was the last word that you got from the crew before the crash? Before the plane smashed and the tires smashed onto the runway and then veered off, overshot the runway really by some 200 meters. What was the last thing the crew had told the passengers?
We didn't, I mean, as far as I remember, we didn't hear any official announcement at that. There was like a big silence on just when the plane stopped. He was rushing to the emergency exits.
So in other words, you didn't get any advance warning that there was going to be a serious problem like this.
No, that's for sure. We didn't get any advance warning.
Olivier, where are you from? What were you doing on this flight?
Oh, I was actually coming back from a week of vacation in France. My sister getting married over there, and I was coming back to Toronto where I work.
Olivier Dubois speaking with us earlier, a passenger who survived this crash of Air France Flight 358 together with the other passengers and crew members. Christopher Williams is a photographer who was working at the scene for CTV and is joining us now on the phone. Christopher, thanks very much. Tell us what you saw when you got there.
Well, I was about 5 minutes away. I received a call that there had been an incident at the airport. Immediately looking to my left, you could see a large plume of smoke, clearly a large fire. When I reached the airport, you could see basically the front third of this Air France jet in a ravine area, which is located towards the end of runway, what they call 24 left at the Pearson Airport here. The rear two-thirds of the aircraft was fully involved in flame and smoke.
Did you see passengers jumping off this plane?
I did not. I was some distance away. My understanding is the passengers evacuated within a matter of 30 to 50 seconds.
There were some reports, and we spoke to some of the passengers who survived, who said they ran as quickly as they could once they got off that plane, and they ran toward that highway, Highway 401, and actually some of them tried to hitch a ride to get out of there as quickly as possible. Did you see or hear about any of that?
I heard accounts that passengers had to quickly get away from the aircraft. Part of the thing which is so incredible about this is this aircraft, as I say, landed in a ravine. Now, not only would there be the debris from the aircraft that would be there, these people would have literally had to scramble up a ravine, which is approximately 15 to 20 feet in some points, which would have obviously been rain-slicked at the time. There was an incredibly violent thunderstorm and lightning that was occurring at the time that this plane landed. So how these people escaped is absolutely a miracle.
I think this will be one of the stories, one of the great stories, the survival of these 309 people on board this aircraft, especially the pictures, and we're showing some of the tape from earlier, some of the pictures of what how the flames engulfed this Airbus 340, Air France Flight 358. Once you got there and saw what was going on, Christopher, you were an eyewitness to the aftermath. What was going through your mind?
Well, it's the typical controlled chaos. I mean, you have emergency vehicles responding from all corners of the city. They act what we call the mutual aid, which is where additional resources from other municipalities are brought in to deal with the situation. So it was a controlled chaos. You had basically security people, you had employees from the airline. Basically, it was a well-choreographed, well-rehearsed disaster plan. I think that they really should be credited. It's absolutely phenomenal. It
goes to show you that people can survive plane crashes, and in this case, 309 people are alive, thanks to the safety procedures on board this aircraft, as well as the efficiency of the crew in getting those doors open, those chutes open, and allowing those passengers within a matter of a few minutes to get off that plane. Some of the eyewitness accounts, some of the passengers we've been speaking with, Christopher, have told some dramatic stories about what was going on. Christopher Williams is a photographer who was working the story for CTV. Christopher, thank you very much. Jenny Cisenhenna is back with us. She's a former Delta flight attendant instructor. You've been listening to these eyewitness accounts, these passengers, the stories of survival. 309 people are alive right now. Perhaps in earlier situations very similar to this, without those safety procedures in hand, Jenny, these people would not necessarily be alive.
That's true, Wolf. It's really amazing the training that kicks in for something like this. And I think that we've all learned from some other of the accidents that have happened, and unfortunately they were not as lucky as this. But this is just truly phenomenal that they were able to evacuate everyone safely.
Because it really was a brief period of escape before the fires really engulfed this cabin and would have prevented any additional escape. What do you say now, especially, and our viewers around the world who are watching, to those passengers who are simply ignoring all the instructions that you're giving, you and your colleagues, Jenny, when you try to give them some of those emergency procedures before takeoff?
Well, you know, it's really, you only had seconds to respond. And I think something like this shows where people that have been on the flight say, well, we landed and immediately it burst into flames and there was smoke. So if people could just pay attention, it's about saving their lives. And I know that they go, oh, we've heard it over and over and over again, but you need to know where your emergency exits are because you're disoriented when there's smoke. So you need to know whether you need to go forwards or backwards to get to your nearest exit, which one is there. It's one of those things where you just have seconds to respond. And that's the most important thing, is to be aware of your surroundings. And that's what all that we're trying to do, is to quickly educate people on what kind of aircraft that they're on, because each aircraft is different.
And I guess, Jenny, one of the bright spots of this crash was it happened in daylight, because we heard that the lights went off in the cabin as the plane was approaching the touchdown, the landing on the runway. The lights went off. Had this occurred at night, it would have been so much more difficult to get those passengers off the aircraft.
Yes, people are certainly able to see as long as the smoke is not there. Once the smoke is there, it's difficult even in the daylight. So the remarkable thing is that they were able to get most of the people out. When you have a situation like this and all of the cabin lights go off, actually emergency lights in the flooring should come on. Those are to guide you towards the emergency exits. But if the plane starts breaking up, then you have the additional problem of then trying to find your exit or just literally going out the hole in a fuselage.
So button this up for us, Jenny. As someone who trains flight attendants to deal with these kinds of emergency situations, give us your thoughts on what we have learned as a result of the crash of Air France Flight 358.
Well, to be aware that when a flight is coming in, that if that is one of the most dangerous times, takeoff and landings, that things can happen then. To pay attention to what the flight attendants are trying to tell you, the information that they're trying to give you about the airplane, because you only have seconds, really, in a situation like this to be able to respond. So luckily, everyone responded like they were supposed to, and it was just a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal ending to this.
A happy ending indeed. Jenny Season-Henna, thanks very much for that. Let me just recap for our viewers. 297 passengers are alive, 12 crew members are alive, 309 people on board Air France Flight 358. After a crash landing at Pearson International Airport outside Toronto from Paris, only 14 minor injuries, passengers for minor injuries, according to the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. The aircraft overshot the runway by about 200 yards, wound up in a ravine. The flames eventually erupted, but the passengers by then were off the aircraft. That's it for now. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. Our coverage of the Air France plane crash in Toronto will continue at the top of the hour with Anderson Cooper 360. Plus, Anderson will join us live from the African nation of Niger with this special report. Thanks very much for joining us.
This has been CNN coverage of breaking news. We now return to our scheduled programming already in progress.
Dramatic departure.
A slide was not deployed. It was 6 meters high, and the flight attendants told us to jump off.
What happened in the moments after Flight 358 crashed?
We're seeing people hanging out of their cars trying to drive and holding video cameras.
The latest on traffic tie-ups near the crash site and flight information from Pearson. And duct tape and determination. Astronauts repair their shuttle, but is it enough to bring them home without disaster?
This is Global News at noon. Here is Anne-Marie Meadowake.
And good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. A day after Flight 358 crashed at Toronto's Pearson Airport, now the smoke and smell of a burnt passenger plane still lingers, and so do many questions. Crews were on site through the night, but investigators are still a long way off from answering the question everyone is asking today. Why did it happen? We have team coverage of the latest developments. Let's start with Global's Daryl Kaneinenbelt, who is live at Pearson Airport this afternoon. Daryl, bring us up to date.
Good afternoon, Anne-Marie. Well, many of those questions probably won't be answered for some time. However, the investigation has started, and it involves a team of 25 experts. The day after, and for the first time, a closer look at the wreckage of Air France Flight 358. And the reality of the lucky escape is now starting to sink in for both firefighters.
It was very black and very intense. I pulled up initially on the roadway, so I was probably 50 yards away from the aircraft, and my face was burning.
And passengers.
Maybe we have 20 seconds. We should go now and run as far as we can.
Passenger stories are now crucial to the investigation by the Transportation Safety Board, including the role extreme weather may have played in the crash.
And we don't limit ourselves to something weather, although it's likely it's going to be a factor.
It was definitely an extreme storm. It was something that we haven't seen here for some time.
All arrivals were canceled during the storm, but not the landings.
Landings could take place, yes.
Raising the question, whose decision was it to land? Airport officials are not saying, but in most cases...
That's the pilot's decision, yes.
Now, whether it was the pilot's decision in this case is going to be part of the investigation. Anne-Marie?
Well, Daryl, with so many people involved, who has final authority over the investigation?
Well, under international law, Canada really has the authority. This Airbus was manufactured in Europe. It was manufactured on that continent, but because the crash occurred on Canadian soil, it is up to Canadian transportation officials to conduct the investigation. Now, as for Air France, we haven't heard anything from Air France today, but just in about 3 hours from now, actually at 3 o'clock, we will be hearing from Air France officials for the very first time.
Daryl, you've been out live at Pearson Airport all this morning, so perhaps you didn't know. We do have a statement from Air France Chairman Jean-Cyril Spinetta, who is on his way to Toronto to offer his input into the investigation and to assess the damage. He claims it's still too early to say what caused the crash, but he does promise the airline would be completely transparent with respect to the investigation. At a press conference, the chairman praised the plane's crew, saying, quote, "I want to pay homage to the crew. I don't know if we should speak of a miracle, but we can certainly speak of the training of the crew and, above all, of the professionalism of the crew." But perhaps it's the passengers from Flight 358 who are most grateful for the skill of the pilot and that crew, who were able to get all 297 people off the plane. Now listen, as this passenger describes the desperate scramble to get off a plane about to explode.
The first exit I came to, the slide was not deployed. It was 6 meters high, and the flight attendants told us to jump off. It was safe to jump off. And I'm like, no, I'm not going off that exit. So I went all the way to the front of the aircraft by business class, and I jumped. And the chute there was half deployed, and they pushed me off. The people behind me were pushed me off the door, and there was people underneath me, and then I just basically fell on them.
Now, those who were injured during the evacuation were treated at area hospitals where Code Orange was quickly put into effect. Healthcare workers were standing by to treat the injured. 16 passengers were taken to nearby William Osler Healthcare Center. 14 were treated at Etobicoke Hospital. 9 of those travelers treated at Etobicoke have now been released, but 5 still remain in hospital. Now, the next step for healthcare officials is to assist patients through their memories of the ordeal.
Our crisis response team have been assisting the patients and their families in addition to the care they've received from our clinical team, and that the patients that are here are resting and recuperating.
Now, a crisis response team has been made up. The team is composed of social workers and volunteers to help patients and their family cope. While flights are landing and leaving from Pearson Airport, the major task of the GTAA will be to clear the incredible backlog of passengers delayed after yesterday's emergency. Global's Robin Gill has been working on this story all morning, and she joins us now from Pearson Airport. Robin, are all the terminals operating today?
Yes, in fact, they all are operating today. As you know, yesterday, the entire operation had to be shut down. No flights were leaving, none were landing. Well, as of today, early this morning, there were several flights that left, but passengers are still facing cancellations and delays.
136 passengers were killed when a Delta Airlines flight crashed at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. Officials say the plane encountered wind shear as it was trying to land in a storm. The violent burst of air forced the craft to crash into the ground. After the accident, airports installed windshield detectors. The time of that crash was 4:03 in the afternoon. That's exactly the same time as yesterday's accident at Pearson Airport. Of course, this isn't the first time a plane has crashed at the airport here in Toronto. On July 5th, 1970, spoilers on an Air Canada plane headed to Los Angeles were inadvertently deployed before landing. All 109 people on board were killed. As Global's Jacqueline Milcherik tells us, this wasn't the only accident to happen here on Canadian soil.
June 26, 1978. Air Canada Flight 189 to Winnipeg overruns the runway at Pearson during an aborted takeoff and crashes into a ravine. 2 of the 107 passengers are killed. June 2nd, 1983, Air Canada Flight 797, which was flying a Houston-Dallas-Toronto route, makes an emergency landing in Cincinnati due to a fire in the washroom. 23 of the 46 people on board die. 2 years later, December 12, 1985, a DC-8 carrying members of the 101st Airborne Division crashes on takeoff at Gander, Newfoundland. 256 Americans are killed. And many will remember September 2nd, 1998, when Swiss Air Flight 111 plummeted into the ocean off Nova Scotia, killing all 229 people on board. Then October of last year, 7 people die after an MK Airlines Boeing 747 crashed in Halifax. This is Global's Jacqueline Molcharik reporting.
We're going to take you back now to Toronto Pearson Airport, where Robin Gill is joined by one of the heroes of yesterday's disaster. Robin?
That's a very good description for Guy Ledet. Guy, you were driving on the property when you saw the plane come down and you just felt you needed to help. What did you do?
Well, I saw the plane go down. I came up to it, and I just didn't even think. I just got out of my vehicle, called my work, said I had to help, threw my phone in the car, and just ran towards the plane.
You came close to a near-death experience yourself while you were on the plane.
I didn't actually realize it until it was over. I mean, we were in the plane looking for people, and as we're going out the front, another gentleman, I don't know who it is, he jumped out, and then I was going to, and then it actually exploded in the rear, and that sort of woke me up to what was actually happening in the situation, and then I just...
You had no idea what you were getting into?
No, none. I didn't even... Just the explosion woke me up to actually where I was, what I was doing, and just, I gotta go.
Well, you've had a day to reflect now. What are your thoughts today?
I'm glad it's over. I'm glad nobody was hurt. It was just an experience I just hope never to repeat again.
Do you consider yourself a hero?
I don't know. I just did what everybody should do, but I don't know. I just overwhelmed by all this attention.
No kidding. Well, Guy Ledet, thanks so much for joining us. You heard it. He doesn't think of himself as a hero. Back to you, Anne-Marie.
Well, Robin, he may not think of himself as a hero, but there are 297 passengers who definitely would think that he is. Global's Robin Gill live at the airport. Thanks, Robin.
What I'm hearing right now is a mic check from officials who are preparing for a news conference that's to happen at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. There we'll hear from the Transportation Safety Board, from the Airport Authority, but also we're expecting officials, the chair of Air France, and also we're told that the Federal Transportation Minister, Jean Lapierre, will be here. All of them will update us on the investigation, which is just really getting underway. We have some pictures in, Andrew, of fresh scenes from the site today. The crash site has been secured, and officials are there now starting to comb through some of the debris, some of the wreckage. We're told that the plane is in 3 pieces, and it's still very hot there. It was an intense fire that took more than 4 hours to put out. And as the officials get to the site, they are looking for some crucial pieces of evidence, black boxes. One records the flight data. These are the instruments on the plane and how they were working at the time. That should provide some evidence as to what, if anything, went wrong when the plane landed. Also, the voice recorder, which will record hopefully the voices of the pilot and the co-pilot, maybe even some of the sound from the cabin as the plane crashed. This clearly, these 2 boxes, crucial pieces of evidence that investigators will be looking for today and throughout the coming days. Then they will go off for analysis. But of course, we are getting ahead of ourselves. They are only just getting on the site. As I said, it's a very hot spot. And so the investigation will continue. As I said, there will be a briefing at 3 o'clock Eastern Time where we hope to hear more information. Andrew.
All right, Lori, thanks very much. Lori Graham at Pearson International, and Lori will be keeping us up to date on this story all day. And that is CBC News Today. You can monitor developments on the Toronto plane crash, the Space Shuttle walk, and all of the news throughout the day on CBC News World. You can also go to our website at cbc.ca/news. We leave you now with more pictures from yesterday's crash as survivors boarded buses for a nearby hotel. I'm Andrew Nichols. Thanks for watching.
All 309 people got off the burning Air France jet. This is CTV News, stories of heroism and survival, and all the day's news right now.
CTV News with Tim Weber and Christine Bentley.
Good afternoon. Christine and Tim are off today. I'm Janice Golding with Tom Gibney. The panic and fear in the aftermath of the crash of Air France Flight 358 is giving way now to relief and many questions.
The Airbus A340 overshot the runway at Pearson International just after 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Many are calling what followed a miracle as flames shot from the wreckage and smoke billowed into the sky. All 309 passengers and crew managed to escape. However, 43 were injured, but most of those injuries were minor. Pearson was under a red alert because of a series of thunderstorms which moved across the GTA yesterday. And today, as the cleanup of the destroyed jumbo jet goes on, transportation investigators will begin the task of deciding if weather was the only factor. CTV's Galit Solomon starts our coverage of the crash of Flight 358.
The time was 4:03. And for 309 passengers and crew aboard Air France Flight 358 from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, a terrifying moment as a routine landing went terribly wrong.
I'm pretty lucky to be alive.
26-year-old Yasmin Ladek was on the Airbus A340 when it skidded more than 200 meters off runway 24 at Pearson International Airport and into a nearby ravine just next to the 401, Canada's busiest highway.
All of a sudden the plane began to jerk quite violently, and it felt like the pilot had lost control, and the next thing I knew the plane had stopped, and I looked behind me and there were flames at the back I could see outside the plane, and some smoke started coming in.
We were like running away as far as we could from the plane, because our biggest fear at that point was that the plane would blow up. It was already a miracle we were still alive at that point.
Eddie Ho was on that flight as well. He describes what happened in the moments following the crash.
The front chute on the left-hand side was also not inflated completely, and people were falling off on top of each other. I remember I fell on another lady. I don't know what happened there, and people fell on top of me as well. We just, I'm sure most of the injuries sustained through this accident was actually from the escape itself and not from the actual crash landing.
Passengers started pouring out of the plane, which was rapidly catching fire. Surprisingly, every single one of them made it out alive. 43 passengers suffered minor injuries. Some of the passengers staggered out of the ravine, climbed up a steep hill, and wandered in shock out onto the highway. Some of them were taken to the airport by motorists. Thunder and lightning could be seen in the skies over Toronto by both passengers and eyewitnesses. While the investigation into the crash continues, experts say the bad weather likely played a factor. And it all happened very quickly. In a matter of just 2 minutes, Flight 358 was evacuated. Officials say the flight's co-pilot was the last to leave the plane. Reporting live, I'm Galit Solomon. Janice?
Thanks, Galit. Now to the investigation. What happened aboard Air France Flight 358? Investigators are sifting through the wreckage for answers. The process is long and arduous. In fact, it could take months before we know. CTV's John Musselman reports.
All that remains is the burnt-out fuselage, still smoldering after the plane slid off the runway and crashed into a ravine on the southwest corner at Pearson Airport. The accident scene has been sealed off by police, and a team of investigators with the Transportation Safety Board of Canada will now try to determine what happened.
We're looking for absolutely everything. Right now, as I said, we're just at the very beginning, so we're not going to rule out anything. Somebody made a comment about black boxes. That'll be one of the issues. This morning we will be going over to the airplane to recover both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. Those will then be transferred back to our lab in Ottawa, where they can be downloaded for any usable information.
Incredibly, all 309 people on board survived. Investigators say weather conditions will be examined. At the time of the crash, a severe thunderstorm cell was moving through the area. Wind shear and a possible lightning strike may also be factors in the crash.
Well, we had been in a what we call a red alert or a lightning alert since 12:20, which means that there is lightning activity within the vicinity of the airport. Normally, all ground handling activity would be stopped under those circumstances. And
investigators still aren't sure how fast the plane was going when it touched down on the runway. Emergency crews were on the scene within 52 seconds.
By that time, approximately 3/4 of the passengers had come down the chute and were into the field. Human nature being what it is, they're going from bad to good, so their tendency is to walk away from the plane. Our initial crews helped with the remaining evacuation and then began the firefighting operation.
Emergency officials say 43 people were transported to area hospitals. Most of the injuries were minor. Investigators with the Transportation Safety Board say it could be months or even a year before they know for sure what caused this crash. And we are live out at Pearson. As you can well imagine, this is an ongoing investigation. Now, just a few minutes ago, we saw a helicopter flying over the accident site. We believe that to be officials with the Transportation Safety Board looking over the burnt-out debris from that fuselage. Now, the key here for investigators, as we were told in a news briefing today, is the black boxes, both of them, with the voice data recorder and the flight data information. Investigators do concede that they have a wealth of information here because they are able to interview the crew and the passengers to find out exactly what happened when that plane touched down on the runway and then slid into that ditch. One other thing to pass along, Air France has scheduled a news conference today. We believe it will start around 2:30 this afternoon. That's when we hope to receive information about the pilot, about the passengers, and about the evacuation of that plane. Because at one point, a couple of the chutes on the aircraft did not deploy, so we're hoping to find out how that happened. The fire chief told us, though, when he arrived yesterday on the scene, that the captain, the pilot, had made the last check, had run out and signaled to the fire chief that everything was clear. That's when they moved in with the water and the fire retardant to try to put that fire out. We'll have much more on this story later tonight at 6 o'clock. Reporting live, I'm John Musselman, and I'll send it back to the desk.
It's tough advice to follow, but the OPP is still asking drivers not to slow down or stop as they pass the airport crash scene. Yesterday, 2 accidents were blamed on gawkers, and this morning's rush hour traffic on Highway 401 near Dixie Road was slowed by drivers who just couldn't resist taking a look. The rudder of the downed Airbus is visible from the highway. Police are urging everyone in the area to think about road safety.
This is CBC News. I'm Diane Buckner. Here's what's making news right now.
So we're going to be looking at absolutely everything.
What went wrong? Investigators say a severe storm probably played a role in sending an Air France jet off the end of a Toronto runway.
Getting off the chute, all I could think is to run as fast as possible.
Miraculous escape. Incredible stories from passengers who made it out of the fiery wreck.
I don't know. I guess I'll just get in line and see what happens.
Delays, diversions, and cancellations. Passengers across Canada are facing long waits because of the crash. And success under the shuttle. An astronaut pulls off an emergency repair job.
It looks like this big patient is cured.
Welcome to CBC News Today. On the day after a terrifying scene of destruction at Toronto's Pearson International Airport. This is what the crash site looks like today near the side of Highway 401. Investigators are on the scene looking for clues in the wreckage of an Air France Airbus 340. We'll be following every detail of this story all day. We'll have the latest on the investigation, and we'll hear the voices of survivors, terrified by their experience and grateful to be alive. A CBC camera was rolling just after the plane touched down yesterday in the middle of pelting rain and flashes of lightning. Instead of slowing to a halt, the aircraft careened off the runway, crashing to a violent and fiery stop. Incredibly, all 209 passengers and crew got out alive. 43 suffered minor injuries. The CBC's Laurie Graham is co-hosting our coverage live from Toronto's Pearson International Airport, where investigators are now trying to figure out what went wrong. Laurie, what's the latest there now?
Well, Diane, we are waiting for a news conference to take place at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll hear more from the Transportation Safety Board, from the Airport Authority. As well, we're expecting officials from Air France, along with the Federal Transportation Minister, Jean Lapierre, and we will hear more about the investigation. As you said, we do have some fresh pictures from the scene today where investigators are starting to comb through the wreckage. The scene is still very hot, but they are trying to find some crucial pieces of evidence, anything that will help explain what happened, why this plane crashed. They are looking for 2 very, very important pieces of evidence, the black boxes. One is the flight data recorder, which records the instruments on the plane at the time of the crash, as well as the cockpit voice recorder. This could provide some information about what was going on in the cockpit, the discussion between both pilots. We heard from Don Enns from the Transportation Safety Board, who spoke about that earlier today.
We're looking for absolutely everything. Right now, as I said, we're just at the very beginning, so we're not going to rule out anything. Somebody made a comment about black boxes. That'll be one of the issues. This morning we will be going over to the airplane to recover both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. We'll have a number of people being brought in from all across the country with different specialties to, in fact, look at all the different potential aspects of this, including weather. The information that we would gain from passengers would be their perception of what was happening inside the airplane, how the flight was progressing, and how the egress was handled.
And of course, Diane, the scene is incredibly hot still because the fire was so intense. We talked to firefighters who said it took more than 4 hours to put that fire out. So they are trying to cool it down to help with the investigation.
Are trying to recover the flight data and cockpit voice recorders from Air France Flight 358, which came to rest in a gully, as you know, in flames after touching down from Paris in terrible weather with 309 passengers and crew. Each and every one got out alive. That's the amazing part. CNN's Mary Snow brings us up to date now. Hi, Mary.
Hi there, Karen. Certainly some amazing stories being told today, but investigators have secured that crash site. They are looking for those black boxes. They had not retrieved them of this morning. They're hoping they can get some more information about the final moments of Air France Flight 358. As you mentioned, weather is certainly something they say they will be looking into because there were thunderstorms yesterday, heavy rain and heavy wind, and there had been a lightning alert at this airport at the time when the plane landed and skidded off the runway. It was carrying 297 passengers, 12 crew. There were only 43 minor injuries, very thankfully, and those on board are still shaking their heads in disbelief. Passengers recounting their stories today, some telling about getting out through chutes, some saying that there were chutes that were not operable, and Air France did confirm that some of them weren't working properly, some of the passengers jumping from the plane after it stopped. Now, one other crucial timing factor in this, the fire department saying that under a minute it had responded to the plane, and at least 3/4 of the passengers had already been evacuated at that point. Within the next minute or so, everyone was off the plane, and there were credits being given to the crew. Officials say the pilot had gone through the plane one more time to make sure that everyone was out, and officials say the plane went up in flames about 1 to 2 minutes after everyone had evacuated. We are expecting another briefing around 3 p.m. Eastern Time with more information possibly on what happened in those final moments. Kira?
All right, we look forward to that 3 p.m. newser. Thank you so much, Mary Snow. Well, if you've ever tried to reach the lavatory on a crowded flight or be the first into the terminal to make a connecting flight, you've probably imagined what it might be like to have to get out fast like those Toronto passengers or die trying. You are looking at the latest pictures obtained by global news cameras in the past hour of the wreckage of Air France Flight 358. The plane is lying nose down in the ravine about 200 meters beyond runway 24 left, gutted by fire. And as you can see, the top of the fuselage is completely gone. Only one engine appears to be intact. The wreck is no longer smoldering, but there are still several fire vehicles around, and a dozen crash investigators are combing the site. Good evening. We have continuing team coverage of this story, including an update from the Transportation Safety Board that we expect to bring to you live at any moment. But first, let's begin with what we know about the final few minutes in the air leading up to the accident. Global's Gus Kim picks up the story.
A day later, the remains of the crashed Airbus was still smoldering, smoke still rising off pieces of the fuselage. Every bit of metal will now be poured over by investigators as they try to determine what caused the crash and who, if anyone, was responsible.
We're going to be looking at absolutely everything. We don't limit ourselves to something weather, although it's likely it's going to be a factor in here.
Air France Flight 358 crashed at Pearson during heavy storms. Here's what we know so far. Just before 4 o'clock, the plane was in the process of finishing off its final descent. NAV Canada transcripts indicate air traffic controllers asked the plane to slow down. Apparently, it was coming in fast. The pilots were fighting heavy clouds, lightning, hail, and high winds. Then at 4:02, the lights in the plane's cabin suddenly go out. A minute later, The plane makes what looks like it's a smooth landing, but it doesn't stop, overshooting the runway by 200 meters, slamming into a ravine and quickly catching fire. Investigators have now recovered the so-called black box, the plane's flight data recorder that may shed light on what happened just before the crash.
Clearly, numerous flights were diverted from Pearson
Right, and
Airport.
we are going to interrupt right now to take you live to a press conference now underway with the latest for Transportation Safety Board officials.
The aircraft was involved in what we call a runway overrun incident or accident following the landing on runway 24 left at Toronto LBPA Airport. And this happened around 1600 or just shortly before that. I don't have the exact time yet. The aircraft stopped at about 200 meters past the departure end of that runway and ended up in a ravine close to Highway 401, as you all know. The evacuation was effected very rapidly as a fire ensued and developed in the left wing area shortly after the aircraft stopped. The TSB is quite impressed with the success of the evacuation. I, as Chief of Investigation Operations for the TSB, am pretty happy to report that all passengers and crew have been accounted for as of noon today. I would like to take this opportunity to also pass my vote of thanks to the emergency response services of the airport, as well as to the Ontario Peel Police Force, which did an outstanding job in having a quick response to this accident to ensure the safety of the passengers, for the ERS, and for the protection and security of the local populace around the aircraft crash site. I've been appointed by my director, Mr. Nick Stoss, as the investigator in charge of this accident investigation. The TSB, in concert and coordination with the Bureau d'enquête et d'analyse de la France as a state of design, state of manufacture, and as you probably know, state of operation of that aircraft, and the NTSB and other interested entities with direct interest in this occurrence were conducting a Class 2 investigation into this accident in accordance with the Canadian Transportation Accident Investigation and Safety Board Act. The Act and other documents describing the TSB investigation process can be found on the TSB website at www.tsb.gc.ca. My team consists presently of two major investigation work groups being managed by operations and technical leads. At present, the team is made up of 35 TSB investigators and 17 other technical experts from other countries in Canada. Earlier today, the team was organized and people were assigned their duties by myself and the team leaders. Today, the onboard recorders for the aircraft were recovered. I must say that they look pretty good. There's some fire damage to them, but we should be able to recover the information. And they're presently being taken, those recorders, to our TSB Engineering Branch Lab in Ottawa for downloading and transcription of the information that they contain.